Chapter 500. The situation was critical. The screen of light where Lon Lon and Ahu were was flashing viciously and looked as if it was about to shatter. It might not be able to last for more than a few breaths before it completely disappeared. Once it disappeared, then to the boy and girl who were not even fledgling shamans, it would be so fragile that it would shatter at the slightest touch. Similarly, the spirit of Nine Een was also facing a life-threatening crisis. With his power as a ladder shaman, he was struggling under the strange, gigantic eyeball, and by the looks of it, he was in incredible pain. The crack in the eyeball was continuously pulling him closer, as if it wanted to devour him. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. Without any hesitation, he charged out like lightning. His clone and puppet followed closely behind him and charged towards Lon Lon and Ahu. At the same time, the mark of the crimson dragon on Su Ming's arm shone. A low roar reverberated in all directions, and the crimson dragon manifested swiftly. With a swing of its gigantic head, it charged towards the spirit of Nine Een, who was being pulled closer by the eyeball, and swung its head horizontally. Su Ming's speed reached its peak, but almost the instant he charged towards them, the screen of light around Lon Lon and Ahu shattered with a bang under the piercing cries of the white figures. It turned into a large amount of shards that scattered in all directions, and the white figures pounced on it. Su Ming's expression was dark. The clone beside him let out a low growl and disappeared in an instant. When it reappeared, the screen of light shattered and the white-robed figures pounced on it. As despair filled Lon Lan's face, the space before her distorted, and Su Ming's clone walked out. At the instant he did so, he formed a seal with his right hand and struck the air before him. The fog around them immediately started tumbling rapidly, as if a great force had exploded outwards from Su Ming's clone's palm. As a violent boom rang in the air, the white figures pouncing on them let out a piercing howl. When the force of impact crashed into them, they froze in midair for a moment before falling back. Su Ming's clone did not hesitate. With a swing of his arm, he swept up Lon Lon and Ahu and immediately retreated. The remaining white figures by his side let out piercing howls as well. Just as they were about to rush over, due to the clone's timely assistance, Su Ming managed to buy himself the most crucial time. Almost at the instant the clone brought Lon Lon and Ahu back, Su Ming closed in on them like a violent gust of wind. The poison corpse puppet also came along. Su Ming's face was filled with killing intent. At the instant he closed in, he clenched his left hand into a fist and hurled it towards the white figure. He was so quick that the white figure did not even have time to dodge, and Su Ming's fist rammed into his body. His body immediately shattered into pieces and turned into a mist that floated backwards before gathering together again. The same thing happened to the poison corpse puppet. Vengeful spirit, Su Ming let out a cold harumph and flipped his left hand over. Immediately, a dark light shone around his body and Han Mountain Bell manifested. Once the bell appeared, as Su Ming formed a seal and pointed at it, the illusion of the nine-headed dragon manifested around the bell. The moment the nine-headed beast appeared, it immediately let out a roar. As it roared, the white figures shuddered and did not dare get closer. Instead, they quickly tried to escape into the fog, but killing intent appeared on Su Ming's face. Once he formed a few seals with his hands, the sixth head of the nine-headed dragon opened its mouth and sucked in a sharp breath in the direction of the white figures. With that one breath, the white figures immediately turned into wisps of fog as they trembled. As if they could not control themselves, they were sucked into the nine-headed dragon's mouth and devoured straight away. The sixth head even chewed a few times, looking as if it was tasty. At that moment, the spirit of Nine Een had a dazed and struggling look on his face. He looked as if he was about to be devoured by the gigantic eyeball, but huge force charged into his body as the crimson dragon's head rammed into him. From the distance, his body looked as if it was pushed away by the crimson dragon's head, causing him to be forced out of the strange soul catcher's body. At the same time it knocked away the spirit of Nine Een, the crimson dragon let out a low roar towards the eyeball. It lifted its claw and swiped at the eyeball, But the instant it was about to touch it, gray fog surrounded the eyeball, and the instant the crimson dragon clawed at it, the fog instantly turned transparent and disappeared without a trace, causing the crimson dragon's claw to miss. It landed on the ground, causing the ground to tremble. All of this might have seemed to have happened over a long period of time, but in truth, only several dozens of breaths had passed since Su Ming and the others were ambushed. As the white figures were devoured by the nine-headed dragon and the gigantic eyeball disappeared, the area returned to silence. The fog that had been swept away by Su Ming's club just now slowly surged towards them from all directions, as if it wanted to drown this place once again. The spirit of nine crawled up from the ground and yanked off his helmet. His face was dark, and there was anger in his eyes, along with deep wariness. The spirit of nine cast Su Ming a glance and said languidly, "You shamans did not keep to your promise. This time, when you came to our world, you must have surpassed the limit of the seal, which is why the seal was broken one after another, causing the abnormalities in the sacred nine-yin skeleton. That eyeball, just now, doesn't possess any powerful divine abilities, but its soul catcher ability is definitely not something a normal person can possess. That is the sacred nine yin's second eye. I was the one who rented you with the scattering dusts, and I was also the one who saved your life just now," Su Ming said calmly. The spirit of nine fell silent, then laughed wryly after some time. "You mentioned the sacred nine just now?" Su Ming put away his spiked club and turned his head around to look at the pale Lan and Ahu. He swept his gaze across the area before his eyes eventually landed on the gigantic skeleton 1,000 feet away. The skeleton you're looking at right now is the sacred nine yin's corpse, which is also the candle dragon you shamans speak of. I had a feeling that something was off just now, and by the looks of it now, that white figure was formed from the vengeful souls of the enemies the sacred nine killed in the past. As for the beast claw that appeared in the fog, it was formed from the rotting flesh on the sacred nine yin's body. You shamans broke the seal on this place in the past, causing the sacred nine yin's will to spread out. In fact, you even tried to take it away, but once you realized that you could not do it, you used it to let the younger generation of the shaman tribe sense its will, and that was how the so-called soul catchers were born. Then you went to my tribe and sealed this place and some other places together. But these seals might seem sturdy, but they're actually very weak. Once a ripple of power that's equivalent to an end shaman's appears in this place, it will shatter. This one doesn't count, the spirit of nine said languidly as he cast a glance at the crimson dragon. Su Ming looked at the gigantic skeleton that was 10,000 feet tall. Most of it had rotted away, but there was not a hint of a rotten stench coming from it. After a moment of pensive silence, Su Ming walked closer to it. Lan and Ahu quickly followed behind him. The spirit of nine cast a wary glance at his surroundings before he also followed. The crimson dragon floated low in the air with sparkling eyes as it looked at its surroundings cautiously. The presence in this place made it incredibly uncomfortable, and the gigantic skeleton gave it a feeling that made it feel incredibly oppressed. As the group got closer, the fog around them slowly spread towards them, causing the area around them to gradually become indistinct once again. Su Ming stopped beside the gigantic skeleton. "Stay here and get close to the skeleton. Sense the candle dragon's will. Whether you can successfully activate the soul catchers will depend on your serendipity." Su Ming looked at the candle dragon's carcass for a moment before he spoke to Lan and Ahu unhurriedly. The boy and girl might be afraid, but they still nodded their heads firmly. The two of them held hands and sat down cross-legged. They closed their eyes and quietly circulated the weak blood in their bodies according to the method their patriarch had taught them. Su Ming did not know how long the boy and girl would need. Once he ordered the spirit of nine to protect them, and the crimson dragon to fend off the attacks around them. He leaped into the air and rushed into the fog above them, appearing on the gigantic candle dragon's carcass. As he stood there, Su Ming could see the shadow of the candle dragon's carcass stretching endlessly into the fog in the distance, and he could not see the end of it. In fact, if he looked over, He would have a misconception that the candle dragon's carcass in the fog was like a path that led to an unknown place. It was also only when he stood there that he could smell a faintly discernible stench spreading out from the candle dragon's carcass. Su Ming's heart trembled slightly. This was the biggest ferocious beast he had ever seen in his memories. Just the physical body of this beast alone was enough to make people tremble. He could not imagine what sort of power in the world would be able to kill this beast besides its life coming to an end. Perhaps it has indeed come to an end, and that's why it chose to die here. Su Ming looked into the endless depths, and once again, he sensed that there were far too many powers and resources in the world that he did not know of. Compared to these things, a feeling of being insignificant rose in his heart. Su Ming sighed. Just as he was about to leave and return to Lon Lon and Ahu's side, his footsteps suddenly came to a halt. The ancient voice that had existed in his ears previously echoed once again. The Candle Dragon tribe will not die and will not perish. If the world crumbles, our tribe will not crumble. If the universe decays, our tribe will not perish. In my long life, I have devoured 97 worlds, and I have devoured more than 1 billion lives. When I open my eyes, I can make any part of the sky light up because of me. When I close my eyes, I can make that darkness cover my entire world. In my life, I have devoured 3 descendants of my tribe so that my life would increase. That willingly, this is how the Candle Dragon tribe grows. My child, you'll be. That voice echoed in the air, and as buzzing sounds rang in Su Ming's head, the strange snake let out a shrill screech from Han Mountain Bell that he had put away. The sorrow in that screech made Su Ming's heart clench in pain. The grief in that voice would give off the feeling of a wanderer who could not find his home, only to have his flesh and blood devoured by his family once he found them. It was an indescribable grief. The strange snake lay in Han Mountain Bell, trembling and hissing non-stop. A freezing glare shone in Su Ming's eyes. In silence, he leaped down from the Candle Dragon's carcass and landed on the land shrouded in fog. Please recommend me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 501. Time trickled by. Su Ming sat cross-legged before Lon Lon and Ahu. The spirit of 9, might also be sitting cross-legged by the side, but his gigantic body looked like a small hill. The Crimson Dragon floated in midair and stared at its surroundings warily. Su Ming had his eyes closed. His expression was calm, but he was uncertain in his heart. He was uncertain about the strange snake's dispirited appearance and its continuous mournful cries. The snake's emotions were slowly shifting from its initial excitement to its current grief. This change in the process made the strange snake look incredibly pitiful. Have the Candle Dragons always devoured their own kind to grow? After an unknown amount of time, Su Ming opened his eyes and stared at the Candle Dragon's carcass. A freezing glare appeared in his eyes. If that's really the case, then this Candle Dragon that has been dead for a long time and only has some of its will left clearly wants to devour my strange snake and use its life force to revive. But since the Candle Dragon has always devoured their own kind, then perhaps this strange snake of mine can also devour it. In his silence, Su Ming looked towards the spirit of 9. You said just now that the gigantic eyeball was the Candle Dragon's second eye? Then how many eyes does this Candle Dragon have? It has 4 eyes. The spirit of 9 opened his eyes and answered in a low voice. The Candle Dragon has 2 heads. One of them is the head of a python, and the other is a hidden head that is similar to ours. Each head has 2 eyes. That's why it has 4 eyes. That gigantic eyeball, just now, was one of the eyes on the python's head. There is a detailed description of the sacred 9 in the rumors related to my tribe. Once it dies, its body must be sealed, or else its flesh and blood will turn into a fierce fog. Its grudge will turn into spirit tears. Its bones will turn into a white fiend, and its 4 eyes will turn into a dark funeral. That I just now was clearly awakened because the seal was loosened. Once I'm targeted by it, it'll be difficult for me to escape with my current level of cultivation. I'll need someone to save me. The spirit of 9 Yin's voice reverberated in the fog, and fell into Su Ming's ears, causing him to narrow his eyes. If I'm devoured by the crack in the pupil of that dark funeral eye, will I become its soul catcher's puppet? Su Ming suddenly asked. Puppet? The spirit of Yin revealed a look of lingering fear as he shook his head. You won't become a puppet. Instead, the essence of your flesh and blood will be sucked away, and you will become a dried corpse. This is not the main point. The main point is that your consciousness will be sucked away and enter the undying and imperishable world created by every adult candle dragon. Over there, he had experienced countless years. It was as if he had been sealed and could never escape. He could only fight against the countless living beings that were killed by the candle dragon in his life. He continued to fight, and even if he died, he would be revived soon after, until your willpower crumbles, until you submit to the candle dragon, until you become a member of the undying and imperishable world. As for your corpse, it remained in the candle dragon's body and became a part of his flesh and blood. This is something even more terrifying than death. Compared to that, dying in battle is the best choice, the spirit of Nine Yin said in a low voice. Su Ming could sense the terror in his voice clearly. What if I don't submit? Is it impossible for me to walk out of the undying and imperishable world? Su Ming asked languidly after remaining silent for a moment. Walk out. The spirit of Nine Yin lifted his head and cast Su Ming a deep look. Every single candle dragon needs to receive worship from an endless amount of races while they are still alive. The more living beings worship them, the stronger they become. This is an instinct. Look at your soul catchers. You should be able to imagine it. Even after its death, it's what can still make soul catchers appear among you shamans. You can tell just how strong this instinct is. Soul catchers are the same as worshippers to the candle dragon. However, there aren't many soul catchers among you shamans. That's why we allowed you shamans to come here. When a candle dragon needs it, it will devour a certain race, but at the same time, those races that worship it will also obtain a special honor. This special honor is to be brought into the candle dragon's undying and imperishable world. The spirit of Nine Yin's voice became deeper. A special honor? A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. That's right, entering the undying and imperishable world to train. Through the countless life and death situations, you will understand the source of battle and create the strongest warriors. Each of the races that worship the candle dragon will choose their most outstanding people to go through this special honor of battle. Their power might not increase by much, but their ruthlessness and decisiveness in battle is something no one else can compare to. Because the number of life and death situations they've gone through is simply too many. However, this is only when the candle dragon is alive. It can release the people who are brought into it at will. That's why this is a special honor. But once it dies, this is no longer a special honor. This is a cage that is even more terrifying than death. Perhaps there are truly people who can walk out of the dead candle dragon's undying and imperishable world, but there is no such thing in our legacy. Su Ming fell silent, and the spirit of Nine Yin no longer spoke. About 2 hours passed by, and suddenly, the crimson dragon in midair let out a low growl. As it growled, Su Ming's eyes sparkled. He saw white figures appearing once again in the fog in the distance. And this time, there was not just one of them, but 7 of 8 of them. They floated about in the fog, and weeping sounds could be heard coming from within. Those weeping sounds fell into Su Ming's ears, causing him to feel irritated once again. If it was just these white figures, it would not have been a big deal. However, there were roars echoing within the fog, and one could vaguely see some bodies covered in scales within the fog as the fog churned. Aside from that, Su Ming also saw a gigantic shadow in the fog. That shadow was about 100-something feet tall. It floated in the air, and the moment Su Ming saw it, he immediately felt as if his gaze was focused on him. That shadow was clearly the gigantic eyeball that had disappeared just now. The candle dragon's second eye. The spirit of Nine Yin's eyes sparkled as he stared at the existences in the fog and whispered, "Don't move. They shouldn't be able to get close." After all, they were born from the candle dragon's body. They attacked us just now because we don't have the dead candle dragon's will on us. Right now, two of your kinsmen are sensing its will and are about to become its worshippers. Because of that, they won't attack us. Once your two kinsmen obtain its acknowledgement, then with them around, we shouldn't be attacked when we go out. As the spirit of Nine Een spoke, he swept his gaze across the area. Su Ming did not act rashly. As time passed by, the spirits in the fog were just as the spirit of Nine Een had said. They were only lingering around, but they did not get too close. Su Ming sent a thought to the Crimson Dragon, and once he calmed it down, he remained cautious. Another hour passed by, and Su Ming's pupils shrank. He saw that the number of white figures in the fog was increasing, and by the looks of it, there were already more than a few dozens of them. The ferocious beasts hidden in the fog were also increasing in number. They were packed densely together, and there seemed to be hundreds of them. Their low growls fused together with the cries, turning into waves of sound. Aside from that, as Su Ming and the spirit of Nine Een remained vigilant, piercing whistles came from within the fog. Those whistles sounded like they came from the distance, but in an instant they closed in on them. A dozen something white rays of light charged out from the fog and turned into arcs that pierced the ground several hundreds of feet away from Su Ming and the others. Those dozen something white rays of light were gray bones. Once they pierced the ground, they immediately melted and turned into small gray humanoids filled with murderous aura. The instant these small humanoids appeared, Su Ming's heart trembled. He discovered to his shock that these small humanoids were incredibly similar to the small humanoids sealed in the mountain rock. However, when he took a closer look, he found that they were different. These small humanoids were gray and not black, and their faces were indistinct. They did not have any detailed facial features. There was a slit where their eyes should be, and there was also a slit where their mouths should be. The bone fiends also appeared. Looks like the seal isn't weakened, but damaged. The spirit of Nine Yin's expression immediately changed. Su Ming's face was dark. He did not speak, and simply stared at the living beings in the fog. As he looked over, the fog tumbled about, and a dozen something white figures appeared. Clearly, as time passed by, the number of spirits in the fog would only increase. At that moment, Ahu, who had his eyes closed all this while, started trembling. Pain appeared on his face, and gradually, that pain turned into determination. However, within that determination, Su Ming saw a hint of respect. Acknowledgement. Based on what the spirit of Nine Een said, if I obtain the right to practice the soul catcher's path, I will have to acknowledge him as my master. Su Ming fell silent. This was White Bull Tribe's matter, and there was no reason for him to interfere. After a moment, pain also appeared on Lanlan's face. She looked as if she was struggling, but that struggle did not last for long before it turned into respect, just like Ahu's. Soon after, the two of them opened their eyes almost at the same time. A dark light shone in their eyes, and once it slowly disappeared, Su Ming found that the two of them were slightly different from before. Thank you for your help, Senior. Ahu stood up and wrapped his fist in his palm towards Su Ming. Lan did the same by his side. Once she thanked Su Ming, she looked towards the living beings in the fog. This is the deal I made with your patriarch. You don't have to thank me. I'll send you back to Shaman City, and the deal will be considered complete. Su Ming stood up and swept his gaze past the living beings in the fog. Don't worry, Senior. I can sense that they harbor no ill will towards me and Lan. We can leave this place smoothly, Ahu quickly said. As he walked forward, the living beings in the fog moved back and revealed a path. However, the moment Su Ming walked out, the living beings in the fog instantly let out shocking roars. The white shadows cried shrilly, the fog beast growled, the bone fiends hissed, and a gigantic eyeball floating in the distance also floated out of the fog to stare at Su Ming. Su Ming remained silent for a moment before he said calmly, "Take the two of them and leave. Send them back to Shaman City. Continue asking for recommendation votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 502. The Spirit of Nine. Een cast Su Ming a glance. He looked as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he did not say anything. Instead, he nodded. You saved my life before, and you also have a contract to hire me. I will send the two of them back to Shaman City safely. Then I will rush over here. If you still don't come out, then I will wait for you here for 10 years. The man wrapped his fist in his palm towards Su Ming and walked towards Lon Lon and Ahu with huge strides. The boy and girl turned their heads around to look at Su Ming with complicated expressions, but they did not say anything. Instead, they turned around and quickly followed the man into the fog. When they saw that Su Ming did not move, the living creatures in the fog opened up a path for the three of them to pass through, then sealed off the area. A freezing glare appeared in Su Ming's eyes. Just as he was about to send his divine sense outwards, the ancient voice suddenly reached his ears once again. This time, it sounded as if the voice was right beside his ears and continued echoing in his ears. You will be the fourth of my kind that I will devour. Come, let me devour you. This is the fate of my kind. You will disappear, and I will wake up once again. The essence of the candle dragon, the splendor of the sky, and the light of the earth open the path for me. The candle dragon. The last few sentences of the ancient voice were filled with a strong desire. This was the first time there was any hint of emotion in the voice's words. The instant the voice spoke, the strange snake let out the strongest and most piercing screech in Su Ming's Han Mountain bell. Its body trembled, and blood veins spread out from all the scales on its body as if it was about to shatter. It rushed out, and the instant it crashed into Han Mountain bell, its body turned into an illusion and broke free from Han Mountain bell to appear before Su Ming. Su Ming had never seen this sort of ability before. He did not have time to think about it. The snake that was about the size of a finger lifted its head and let out a powerful screech in the air before Su Ming. As it screeched, the cries of the white figures around it instantly became piercing to the extreme. The low growls from the fog beasts shook the sky, and the bone fiends also started roaring at the same time. In fact, the fog around the gigantic eyeball also started tumbling about furiously, as if all the sounds in the area were responding to the snake's screeches. Struggle appeared in the snake's eyes. It turned its head around in midair and cast a glance at Su Ming. There was a reluctance to part in its eyes, along with grief and a form of attachment. When Su Ming saw the small snake's eyes, his heart trembled. As the snake hissed, the fog beasts that were blocking Su Ming's path opened up a path for him, opening up layers upon layers of encirclement. If Su Ming continued down this path, then he would not run into any danger, and he would be able to leave the Candle Dragon's burial ground. This was clearly a path left behind by the strange snake for Su Ming. At that moment, there were still traces of blood on the snake's body. It swiftly withdrew its gaze and let out a sorrowful hiss. The struggle on its face became even more intense, but its body was not under its control. It charged towards the Candle Dragon's corpse and burrowed into it, straight towards the Candle Dragon's head, whose body was unknown in length. Su Ming's eyes gradually turned red. He could leave now, but he could not. This strange snake had been with him for many years, and when Su Ming reappeared after disappearing in the cave abode, he could sense the snake's joy. Right now, he absolutely could not watch the snake disappear into the Candle Dragon's body. The only outcome awaiting it would be to be devoured by its own kind and turn into a life form that would awaken them. Su Ming lifted his left hand swiftly and swung it in the air. Zilong Shun. The moment Su Ming swung his arm, the mark of the Spirit of Nine Een on his left hand immediately let out a powerful light. As a sigh traveled into the air, the old spirit of Nine Yin's body slowly manifested before Su Ming. Senior, please enter the Candle Dragon's body and stop it from devouring and fusing with it. Su Ming looked towards the old man. I can't help you. This sacred Nine Een was worshipped by my people when it was alive. It still has its will after it died, and right now, there's a form of madness in that will. The old man looked at the Candle Dragon's carcass and spoke in a low voice. I can't fight against it. The old man averted his gaze and looked towards Su Ming with an apologetic look. I'll give you more spirit plunder. Su Ming's heart was filled with anxiety, and he immediately said, it doesn't matter how many spirit plunder you have. With this will, it'll be difficult for anyone to enter. But that snake belonged to you previously. Perhaps you can enter, but I can't. As the old man spoke, he took a step forward and appeared at a broken spot on the candle dragon's carcass. Right at the instant he was about to enter, a rebound suddenly spread out from the candle dragon's body. Under that rebound, the old man was forced a few steps back, and he looked towards Su Ming with a wry smile. Su Ming looked at the candle dragon's carcass, and a glint appeared in his eyes. Usually, there was no such thing as should in the world. As long as it was something he felt he had to do, then it was something he should do. Su Ming took a step forward and lifted his right hand to point at the crimson dragon in the sky. That dragon instantly turned into a ray of red light and charged towards Su Ming. Once it turned into the mark of a dragon on Su Ming's arm, he charged towards the candle dragon's carcass. His doppelganger and the poison corpse puppet followed closely behind him. Yet the moment Su Ming closed in on the candle dragon's carcass and was about to crawl into that broken spot, a powerful rebound spread out from the candle dragon's carcass, and in an instant, it swept past Su Ming's body. The instant it swept past him, Su Ming's body trembled. A powerful force of rejection, along with a will that was close to madness, spread through his entire body. The strength of that will cause Su Ming to instantly feel as if he was in the middle of a raging sea, as if he had turned into a lone boat that had no control over itself in that roaring, raging sea. Get lost. A low roar came from within that will. That roar crashed into Su Ming's mind, causing his body to tremble, and the mark of the crimson dragon on his right arm was forcefully separated from his body. Su Ming coughed out a mouthful of blood. His face was pale, and once he was pushed several hundreds of feet back, he coughed out blood once again. He lifted his head and stared at the candle dragon's carcass with an incredibly dark expression. The old spirit of Nine Een by his side sighed and shook his head. Just as he was about to say something, he saw a glint in Su Ming's eyes. He lifted his right hand and pointed at the crimson dragon. Immediately, the crimson dragon that had just been forced out turned into a mark on Su Ming's arm once again. At the same time, Su Ming looked towards the old spirit of Nine Een and sent his divine thought to him. The old man sighed, and his body gradually disappeared, eventually turning into the faint mark on the back of Su Ming's left hand. Once he finished doing all this, Su Ming put away the poison corpse and his clone. Once he wiped away the blood at the corners of his mouth, he took a deep breath and sent his divine sense into the black stone fragment hanging on his neck. The dark light from the stone shone brightly, and the instant it covered Su Ming's entire body, a strange snake's presence appeared on his body. That presence was incredibly real, almost completely real. The instant that presence appeared, Su Ming charged forward at full speed. He was so quick that he was about to close in on the candle dragon's carcass once again in an instant. At the same time, the rebound that came from the carcass disappeared the moment it touched Su Ming. Su Ming heard a soft gasp of surprise from the will that had descended on him. Su Ming knew that he could only deceive it for an instant. Very soon, the remnant will of the candle dragon would react to him. At that time, no matter what, it would be difficult for him to enter the candle dragon's carcass again. That was why he did not hesitate. He rushed forward swiftly and charged straight into the candle dragon's body. Yet the instant he entered the candle dragon's carcass, the crimson dragon mark on his arm separated from his body once again. The marks on Su Ming's left hand, right hand, and even the poison corpse in his storage bag, as well as the clone of his puppet, all of them seemed to have been filtered out of Su Ming's body and were blocked outside the candle dragon's body. The only things that could enter the candle dragon's body were Su Ming's real body and his nascent soul. Besides them, all other external forces were blocked. Su Ming's face darkened, and he decided that he might as well take off his mask. At that moment, he was on a path of dried-up flesh and blood. It was dark all around him, and the stench of decay filled the air. This was the candle dragon's tail. The feeling under his feet was like mud, and it gave off a nauseating feeling. Su Ming looked at his surroundings. His nascent soul had returned to his body, and a brilliant glint appeared in his eyes. When he spread his divine sense outwards, it was immediately absorbed by the walls of flesh around him, and he could only spread it to an area of 100 feet. Not only did this place block his divine sense, it also cut off his connection with the Crimson Dragon, his puppet, and the spirits of Nine. Fortunately, since they were all in the candle dragon's body, he still retained the connection between him and the strange snake. At that moment, in silence, he charged forward, and based on the connection between him and the strange snake, he moved forward swiftly. At the spot where Su Ming had crawled into and disappeared was the candle dragon's gigantic carcass at its tail. The poison corpse puppet had a dazed look on its face as it sat there, unmoving. Ji and Hai's corpse lay by the side. His entire body was covered in black beetles, and he, too, remained unmoving. The Crimson Dragon let out a low growl and paced back and forth as it did so. Anxiety appeared on its face. It could no longer sense Su Ming's presence, and after a long while, it decided to shrink its body and turn into a small dragon. It landed at the spot where Su Ming had disappeared and started waiting. As for the old spirit of Nine, he was currently frowning and sighing. It was not that he did not want to help, but he truly could not enter the candle dragon's body. He was slightly curious as to how Su Ming had done it. Perhaps the candle dragon's presence truly remained in his body, and that was why he could enter. The change in Su Ming's presence just now had puzzled him. This child has a great amount of luck. That small snake is clearly a descendant of the candle dragon. It's rare to see such a ferocious beast nowadays. Well, I'll just wait here for a few days. If he comes out, then I can continue fulfilling my promise, but if he doesn't, then I'll just treat it as a loss. The old man sighed and sat down by the side. First place for recommendation votes? I'm seeing things. Please give me recommendation votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 503. As for Su Ming, he continued charging down the dark path made of flesh and blood. The rotting stench around him was nauseating, and if he breathed in it for a long period of time, he would even feel drowsy. Su Ming bit the tip of his tongue to keep himself awake and increase his speed. After all, this candle dragon was already dead and was far from how it was when it was still alive. The level of danger it posed had been reduced by a large margin, but Su Ming was still very cautious. If it was not because he could not bear to watch a snake being devoured, he would definitely not have stepped into this dangerous place. As he continued charging forward, Su Ming even saw some rotting corpses that had been here for an unknown number of years. Those corpses were the same as the candle dragon. They had not completely decayed. That terrifying sight would make all those who saw them feel fear. Besides, judging by the places where the corpses were scattered, they did not seem to have moved at all. When Su Ming remembered how difficult it was to enter the candle dragon's body, a sharp glint appeared in his eyes. Could it be that no one has ever entered the candle dragon's body after it died? The area around him was also silent. Besides Su Ming's footsteps, there was not a single sound. In fact, there was not even wind. No matter how fast Su Ming was, it was difficult for him to stir up a weak gust of wind. This strange situation made Su Ming even more cautious. The place was also incredibly hot, causing sweat to gradually appear on his body. He had been in the glacier for a long time, and in truth, there was already quite a lot of cold air in his body. It had been a long time since Su Ming had sweated due to that cold air, but in this place, that cold air was continuously dispersing, and sweat was also seeping out. As he continued charging forward, besides the rotting corpses, Su Ming also saw quite a large amount of white bones. Most of those bones had mostly melted away, and what was left behind was black. By the looks of it, they did not belong to humans, but to ferocious beasts. In fact, Su Ming even saw some things that looked like enchanted treasures scattered around the area. However, He was in a hurry and did not have time to examine them carefully. He could only bring away the things he saw along the way. Just how many years has this candle dragon been dead? As Su Ming charged forward, he tried to sense his snake's location while making guesses in his heart. As he charged forward, a sense of danger suddenly appeared in his heart. He forced himself to take a few steps back, and almost at the instant he did so, a black bone spike shot out from the wall of flesh in front of him. That bone spike was entirely gray. When it appeared once again, it let out a bang and caused the wall of flesh on the ground to ripple. Then, it turned into a small gray humanoid that was only the height of Su Ming's knees. That small humanoid was the bone fiend Su Ming had seen outside, the one formed by the candle dragon's bones. The bone fiend opened its mouth toward Su Ming and let out a low growl. Its eyes shone with a dark light, and it charged towards him. At the same time, faces protruded out from the walls of flesh around Su Ming. Those faces were incredibly ferocious, and once they appeared, they let out piercing howls, as if they wanted to rush out and devour Su Ming alive. Those faces did not seem to belong to humans, but to ferocious beasts of all shapes and sizes. They were formed by the candle dragon's flesh and blood, the beast that had existed in the fog outside. Similarly, sharp spikes shot out from the walls of flesh before Su Ming. Gray bone fiends manifested right after them, and weeping sounds traveled forth from a spot further in the distance. The white, resentful shadows appeared out of nowhere. Soon after, low murmurs appeared indistinctly behind Su Ming. An eyeball that was about 100 feet big manifested from the illusion several thousands of feet behind Su Ming. The edges of that eyeball were white, and right in the middle was a brownish-yellow pupil. At that moment, there seemed to be a slit in that pupil, and it was slowly opening up. A strange suction force came continuously from behind Su Ming. The murmurs sounded as if they were calling out to him. Su Ming's heart trembled, and he had the misconception that he wanted to turn his head around to look. Yet at that moment, he bit the tip of his tongue and immediately snapped out of his reverie, telling himself that he absolutely could not turn his head around to look. In truth, even if he did not turn his head around, he could still guess that the thing that appeared behind him was the candle dragon's second eye. There was no one else around the candle dragon's body, and Su Ming did not need to worry about exposing his identity as a berserker. The instant the gray humanoid closed in on him, a freezing glare appeared in Su Ming's eyes. The 4 berserker bones in his body, along with the 5th berserker bone formed from the Wind Berserker's inheritance, burst forth with a powerful force at the same time. That power instantly surged into every single corner of Su Ming's body, and the feeling of his physical body becoming stronger was something he had not felt for a long time. Ever since he came to the land of the shamans, besides when he was in the glacial region, he had never brought out the full power of the berserker tribe during a battle. The moment he did so, cracking sounds immediately came from within him. At the same time, Dark Mountain's berserker mark appeared on Su Ming's face, and Dark Mountain Tribe's mark appeared on his chest under his robes. The full power of the berserker tribe caused the mark of the berserker tribe to appear completely. Get lost! Su Ming let out a low growl and clenched his right hand into a fist before hurling it towards the small, gray humanoid pouncing on him. The 5 berserker bones on Su Ming's spine shone with a piercing golden light. That golden light spread through his body, and if anyone looked behind him, they would even be able to see that there was golden light seeping out from his spine. The full power of the berserker bones in his body was brought out, and with Su Ming's punch, he hurled it forward with all his might. A loud bang rang in the air, and cracking sounds came from within Su Ming's body once again. The small gray humanoid shuddered and took a few steps back before its body exploded and turned into a bone that was flung backwards. However, while it was in midair, the bone shone with a gray light and turned back into a small humanoid once again before it continued charging toward Su Ming. Su Ming had been suppressing his power as a berserker for a long time. At that moment, he suddenly had a feeling that he had not used all of his power after that full-powered punch. It was as if there was still some power left in his body. A glint appeared in his eyes. The mumbling sounds behind him were getting closer. At that moment, he did not have time to think. He took a huge step forward and rushed forward. Before him, a large number of small gray humanoids roared and rushed towards him. A large number of white figures rushed towards him with piercing cries, and an endless amount of fog beasts crawled out of the walls of flesh around him to charge towards Su Ming from all directions. Su Ming let out a low growl, and the illusion of his divine general armor appeared around him. It had been a long time since he last activated this armor. Once he did so, the fog arranged itself and turned into multiple runes, causing the illusionary armor to reach a certain degree of sturdiness. At the same time, as Su Ming moved forward, his nascent soul opened its eyes and flew out from the top of his skull to float above his head. Streams of light flowed out of the nascent soul's body, and once it appeared, it opened its mouth and spat out thunderous words. The small virescent sword manifested and swept forward. At the same time, Su Ming's nascent soul formed a seal with its hands and let out a mouthful of nascent soul aura. It pushed outwards, and that aura turned into a fist before it pushed outwards. When two enemies meet, only the brave will win. Su Ming did not take even half a step back. He could not move back now. In fact, he had a feeling that he had returned to the battlefield between the shamans and berserkers. As he took a step forward, he lifted his right hand and swung it towards the incoming beasts that were the candle dragon's carcass. With that one stroke, the area around him seemed to have frozen. Berserker obliteration appeared once again. With that one stroke, booming sounds reverberated in the air. The fog beast before Su Ming immediately let out shrill screams of pain and turned into a large amount of rotten flesh that spilled all over the ground. These fog beasts were not strong. They were only at the level of a medial shaman, but their numbers did not stop. They were still continuously appearing on the walls of flesh around him. The bone fiends were not too strong, but they were undying and indestructible. Even if they crumbled under berserker obliteration, they would soon reappear. The truly strong ones were the white figures and the weeping spirit tears. Each of these spirit tears was equivalent to a medial shaman who had reached the peak. However, if they were compared to the candle dragons behind Su Ming, all of them were clearly inferior. After all, the candle dragon was already dead, and only a remnant of his will remain. However, as he attacked, Su Ming made a shocking discovery. He noticed that the ferocious creatures formed by the candle dragon's death were slightly stronger compared to when they were in the fog outside. The white figures had gained more corporeal form, and their weeping sound were even more shrill. There was a small tail behind each of the bone fiends. In fact, some of the ancient fiends' tails were much longer. These bone fiends were much stronger than the others. The fog beast's claws had also become much sharper, and their bodies had also become much larger compared to when Su Ming had met them in the fog. The seal has been broken. Those ferocious creatures are starting to be born from the candle dragon's carcass. You shamans once broke the seal in the past. Then you sought help from us spirits of 9 to seal it once again. But that seal is very weak. The spirit of 9 Yin's words echoed in Su Ming's head, and he suddenly understood. This was the reason why the creatures formed by the candle dragon's carcass were not too strong. These creatures have just been born. That's why they aren't incredibly strong. However, as time passes by, they will become stronger within a short period of time. At that time, they will truly be considered as ferocious creatures born from the candle dragon's carcass. At that moment, one of the bone fiends manifested once again after breaking down. Its originally short tail had grown several times longer and was dragging on the ground. It lifted its head and let out a roar towards the sky, and the presence spreading out from its body was equivalent to that of the white-robed shadow. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. The suction force behind him was becoming clearer. Clearly, the eyeball was also rapidly closing in on him. Similarly, perhaps to the eyeball, it was also rapidly growing. Without a hint of hesitation, Su Ming immediately brought out a small bottle from his storage bag. Within it was sea marrow, which could allow him to instantly recover all his power. Once he drank one drop, the sea marrow looked as if it had exploded in his body and turned into a large amount of heat. Su Ming's eyes shone brilliantly, and he charged forward, executing the extreme speed he gained after he created Berserker Obliteration, which allowed him to travel at the speed of light. There was no wind in this place, but Su Ming had the provenance of wind within him. Right then, wind was circulating rapidly within him, causing Su Ming's speed to be equivalent to that of warping. He charged forward, and Han Mountain Bell also appeared around him. With the sturdiness of the bell and the sturdiness of his divine general armor, he wanted to carve out a path and rush as quickly as possible. Please recommend me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Start Point and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 504. The drop of sea marrow looked as if it had exploded in Su Ming's body and turned into a wave of heat that raged like magma. It exploded within Su Ming's body and turned into a powerful force that surged straight towards his 5 berserker bones. Once it was absorbed by those berserker bones in extreme speed, it swelled outwards. As it swelled up, it was as if a long river had turned into thousands of streams that instantly filled every single part of Su Ming's body, giving him a feeling as if there was an endless amount of power within him that he could not bring out. The strength of the sea marrow made Su Ming's eyes shine brilliantly. As he took a step forward, he burst forth with his strongest speed. With this speed, he did not need to execute any other divine abilities. His divine general armor, Han Mountain Bell, his body, and the virescent sword before him were his best weapons. He was like an arrow. As long as he had a powerful charge, then he would be able to destroy everything in his path. Booming sounds echoed in the air, and all the bone fiends that blocked Su Ming's path were forced back by his violent charge. Their bodies crumbled, and before they could reappear, Su Ming had already moved past them. As for the fog beasts, they also let out shrill screams of pain before their bodies turned into rotten flesh that scattered in all directions. There were also the crying white figures. Their cries were shrill and shrill, but even with Su Ming's extreme speed, they still pounced on him, and as the booming sounds echoed in the air, they disappeared without a trace. With an extreme speed, Su Ming instantly charged several thousands of feet into the tunnel. He had charged out those several thousands of feet in one breath, and that one breath contained all the power of the sea marrow in his body. Once he charged out, his face was pale and blood trickled out of the corners of his mouth. Han Mountain Bell had shrunk a lot, and there were many cracks on his divine general armor. Clearly, the charge this time had also placed quite a huge burden on him. His nascent soul was above his head. Its eyes were sparkling as it controlled the small virescent sword to sweep through the area. In front of him, there were still countless ferocious beasts in the Candle Dragon's body passage. They were continuously born and transformed as if there was no end to them. This sort of feeling was enough to make a person's mind break down and make them feel as if they would not be able to rush out no matter what they did. Once Su Ming panted a few times, he immediately brought out the small bottle containing sea marrow and drank another drop without any hesitation. Once that drop entered his mouth, the feeling as if his body was about to explode instantly appeared in his mind. Veins popped up on his face, and his body felt as if it was about to swell up endlessly, but he still looked normal on the surface, as if that swelling up was just an illusion. With a low growl, blood capillaries appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He took a step forward and rushed forward. In the span of a breath, he covered another several thousands of feet, and all the ferocious beasts that tried to block his way were crushed. However, once the drop of sea marrow disappeared from Su Ming's body, he coughed out a mouthful of blood. Han Mountain Bell shrank back around him, and a large amount of his divine general armor was damaged. His face was pale, but his gaze was firm. The more you use these beasts that were born from your corpse to block my way, the more it proves that you, who are dead and still have some of your will left, are actually afraid. Afraid that I'll chase after you. If that's the case, then you're incredibly weak right now. So weak that perhaps if someone touches you, your will disappear. As Su Ming panted, he spoke with a smile. He knew that the Candle Dragon's remaining will would definitely be able to hear his words while he was in its body. There was no response from the ancient voice around him. The only thing that could be heard were the ferocious beasts pouncing on Su Ming with even more frenzied actions. Killing intent shone in Su Ming's eyes. As he took a step forward, he brought out the sea marrow once again. This was the third time he drank that liquid in this place. When the feeling as if his body was about to explode rose in him, Su Ming let out a low growl and once again forced his way forward several thousands of feet. As he charged forward, cracking sounds came from his body. Those sounds came from his 5 berserker bones, and the instant they appeared, Su Ming's 7th berserker bone suddenly started shining with a golden light. However, the golden light from the 7th berserker bone was a little weak and could not compare to the other 5, but it was indeed shining. The appearance of that light made Su Ming's level of cultivation instantly break through the calmness of the 5 berserker bones and increase by quite a large margin. A focused glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. Before he drank the sea marrow, he had felt as if he still had some strength left after bursting forth with all his might. At that time, he had been facing the endless amount of ferocious beasts and did not have time to think about it in detail. Then, as he drank the sea marrow 3 times, that feeling of having some strength left would increase every single time. At that moment, that feeling of having some strength left continued accumulating, causing his 7th berserker bone to shine with a golden light. The appearance of that golden light meant that Su Ming's 7th berserker bone was in the midst of awakening. It was as if he had been accumulating strength for a long period of time, and with the help of the pressure in this place and the stimulation from the sea marrow, Su Ming's level of cultivation finally reached an explosive state in the midst of this battle. The 7th berserker bone's golden light gradually grew brighter from its weak state. It might still not be able to compare to the other 5 berserker bones, but by the looks of it, it only needed one more stimulation before it would completely erupt. Su Ming picked up the bottle of sea marrow and drank another drop. His eyes turned bloodshot, and his hair moved without wind. Loud booming sounds came from his body, and golden light shot out from his spine in a piercing manner. The sea marrow looked as if it was boiling in Su Ming's body. This time, once all its power surged into his berserker bone, it did not spread outwards. Instead, it was completely absorbed by the 7th berserker bone. As it did so, a large amount of golden light surged into the air, and the 7th berserker bone instantly became the same as the other 5. 6 berserker bones instantly caused Su Ming's level of cultivation to increase by a large margin. Veins popped up on his body, and, as he let out a low growl, he took a huge step forward and hurled a punch forward with his right hand. With that punch, the 6 berserker bones circulated at full power, causing all the power in Su Ming's body to gather in his arm. As he hurled his punch forward, a layer of ripples appeared out of nowhere and spread out before him. The ferocious beasts before him were sent tumbling backwards, and quite a number of them even exploded. Su Ming panted harshly and turned into a long arc that charged forward. However, once he traveled several thousands of feet forward, a large amount of ferocious beast faces immediately appeared on the walls of flesh on the candle dragon's carcass. Fog beasts swiftly appeared, and at the same time, rows of bone spikes shot out from the ground, turning into a large amount of bone fiends that seemed endless. There seemed to be no end to them. Su Ming stared at the depths of the tunnel on the candle dragon's body. As he looked at it, a resolute look appeared on his face. There was a berserker bone protruding out from under his robes on his back. That berserker bone was usually hidden under his robes, and no one else could see it. Only Su Ming could sense it. It was located at the 6th berserker bone. When Su Ming looked into his body, he could clearly see that after the 5 golden berserker bones, the 6th berserker bone was dull, but the 7th berserker bone was also shining with a golden light. However, due to the dullness of the 6th berserker bone, they could not fuse into one. Occasionally, a numbing feeling would come from that spot, as if there was lightning crawling through it. This berserker bone was the one Su Ming had used the freezing air in the glacier to freeze his flesh, then cut it open and shove the other half of the lightning crystal of inheritance into it. He had only absorbed the wind crystal of inheritance when he was in the glacier. He never had the chance to refine the lightning crystal of inheritance. After all, the wind crystal of inheritance alone had already used up a large amount of Su Ming's energy. Now, the wind crystal of inheritance had already melted and fused together with Su Ming's fifth berserker bone, and they were now one. Su Ming had originally intended to wait until he calmed down before slowly refining the lightning crystal of inheritance. But now that he was facing the threat of the endless amount of ferocious beasts within the candle dragon's body, he gritted his teeth. The instant the ferocious beast that had just appeared pounced on him, he lifted his right hand and struck the protruding sixth berserker bone of his junior. With that one strike, sharp pain shot through Su Ming's entire body. At the same time, the half of the lightning crystal of inheritance hidden in his flesh and blood, which was the sixth berserker bone on his spine, instantly pierced into his spine. A powerful bolt of lightning erupted forth from Su Ming's spine. That bolt of lightning charged upwards and connected to Su Ming's feet. As rumbling sounds reverberated in the air, a large amount of lightning sparks appeared out of nowhere, with Su Ming's body as the center. Soon after, the origin enchanted vessel in the transcendence realm in his body and the lightning in the world also went berserk at that moment. They charged towards the sixth berserker bone in Su Ming's body and fused together with it in an instant. Sharp pain spread through Su Ming's entire body, causing a pained expression to appear on his face. At the same time he let out a roar, the lightning crystal of inheritance forcefully fused with his berserker bone in this extreme manner. As lightning sparks flashed, as thunder rumbled, and as the sixth berserker bone gradually shone with a golden light, the 7 berserker bones on Su Ming's spine fused into one, causing him to lift his head swiftly and rush forward. Almost at the instant, Su Ming forcefully fused with the lightning crystal of inheritance, beyond the world of Nine, in the periphery of the land of the shamans, and in the distance of the vast Black Sea. A vast and boundless continent was charging towards the land of South Morning at an incredible speed. The waves that were stirred up surged into the sky, and they were so quick that they continuously let out loud, booming sounds that reverberated in all directions. There was a mountain on this continent. 9 bolts of lightning had descended from the sky over the countless years, causing the mountain to be surrounded by an endless amount of lightning. At that moment, there was an old man with crimson hair sitting cross-legged on the mountain. That old man had a hooked nose and a dark expression on his face. He opened his eyes swiftly, and his gaze was ghastly. There was a monstrous killing intent and anger in his eyes, along with a hint of wariness. He was Eastern Wasteland's Chi Lei Tion. He was the true scion of the Berserker tribes, Lightning Berserker. However, he only had half of the lightning crystal of inheritance in his body at that moment, and the remaining half was the source of his anger and madness. I'm really sorry. Since I'm participating in the Chidian Writer Salon, I can only update once a day for the next few days. But I'll update when I come back. Please forgive me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 505. Within the Candle Dragon's carcass in the world of Nine, lightning swam through Su Ming's entire body. The full power of the 7 berserker bones had not only increased his speed, his power had also increased by a large margin. When he rushed out, he had already traveled several thousands of feet before he drank the 4th drop of sea marrow. There was originally not much of it, but when Su Ming was searching for herbs in Shaman City, he had discovered that they were selling it. However, there were not many of them, so he bought them with some shaman crystals. Because of that, he did not stop for even a single moment. When he was 7,000-something feet away, there was a bloody storm behind him, and wherever he went, there would be wreckage. However, he also paid a great price for it. He coughed up blood, his divine general armor shattered, Han Mountain Bell was retrieved, and his chi tumbled about in his body, causing his face to turn pale, but he did not stop. Instead, once the power of sea marrow was completely drained, his nascent soul let out a piercing screech. As it screamed, Su Ming's nascent soul's entire body shone with light. Once it enveloped Su Ming's body, it charged forward, and his body immediately disappeared. His nascent soul had warped and brought his body nearly 1,000 feet away. Once it appeared, Su Ming's nascent soul let out a piercing screech once again and warped once again. He did it 7 times in a row, causing Su Ming to appear 7,000-something feet away once again. Finally, there were no longer any ferocious beasts appearing before him, but behind him there was an endless amount of them chasing after him. Su Ming panted harshly. His nascent soul had become much more dispirited and had returned to his Dantian region. Su Ming gritted his teeth and charged forward like a long arc. His speed became faster as he traveled through the candle dragon's carcass. After a moment, he could only hear faint roars from the ferocious beasts behind him. Clearly, he had already widened the distance between them. However, Su Ming could not relax for even a single moment, because the feeling of him being sucked in did not disappear. Instead, it became stronger. The murmurs that reached his ears repeatedly made Su Ming want to turn his head around to look. However, he remembered the spirit of Nine Yin's words. He absolutely could not look into the candle dragon's eyes. Su Ming did not turn his head back. He continued charging forward, and on the way, he drank another drop of sea marrow, causing his cultivation base to recover in an instant. His speed became so fast that it could not be described with words. As he continued going deeper into the candle dragon's carcass and got closer to its head, the heat around him gradually reached its peak. Even breathing would cause him to feel a burning pain in his body. In fact, the surrounding flesh walls had already turned crimson. There was also a large amount of liquid flowing along the surrounding flesh walls. When the liquid reached the ground, it made a sizzling sound. It was clear that the liquid contained incredibly powerful corrosive properties. The burning sensation and the stuffy feeling that made it hard for him to breathe made Su Ming's breathing quicken and his heart fill with irritation. Su Ming's nascent soul would be 7th soul, marrow dragon's blood, sea, and spirit of the dragon's soul, king, spirit king Su. Su, sea, and San, Su of the sea, Yang, and Ming. If it was anyone else, perhaps they would have found it hard to withstand the heat. This had little to do with their level of cultivation. This was simply an ability to resist heat. However, Su Ming still maintained his incredible speed. The heat might be incredibly unbearable to him, but this was not the first time he had experienced something like this. When he was still a teenager, this sort of earth and fire had existed in the cave abode he created. He had also once ventured into the depths of the cave abode and seen the wings of the moon, as well as the rolling magma. He had also practiced the fire berserker art, and he had never given up on it. The fire berserker's art of worshipping the moon itself allowed Su Ming's control over fire to be much stronger than other people's. That was why he could run like the wind in the candle dragon's body, and his speed did not decrease in the slightest. Time trickled by. Su Ming had no idea how much time had passed, but the connection between him and the small snake remained in his mind. He could sense that the small snake was charging forward from a place far away. He called out to it multiple times, but the small snake did not pay any attention to him. However, Su Ming could sense through the connection between him and the small snake that there was an unfamiliar power within the small snake's body that seemed to be controlling its mind. With this feeling, Su Ming did not stop for even a single moment. He continued chasing after him until he arrived at a region where even he found it a little difficult to withstand the heat. It was an area of 10,000 feet that looked as if it could burn all matter. At the instant he stepped into the area of 10,000 feet, pain shot through Su Ming's entire body. It was the pain of being burned. He saw a green light shining in the area of 10,000 feet before him. The ground was green, as if it was a swamp. It was empty, and there was not a single skeleton in the area. A large amount of heat was being emitted from this green swamp. Su Ming had only taken a few steps when the feeling as if his entire body was about to be burned to ashes became incredibly strong. If he did not do anything and continued walking forward like this, then he believed that his legs would burn in less than 3 steps. At that time, the only thing that would await him would be death. However, he did not have much time to think about it. The suction force behind him and the mumbling sounds were becoming stronger, causing him to be unable to stop and think of a perfect method. During that moment of danger, Su Ming lifted his right hand and immediately bit the tip of his finger to wipe the blood from his eyes. The instant he wiped the blood from his eyes, the fire berserker art started circulating in Su Ming's body. The moon could not be seen in this place, but the instant he smeared the blood on his eyes, it looked as if it was burning, causing Su Ming to burn his blood. The instant his blood burned, the heat in this place instantly became much weaker. Without any hesitation, Su Ming charged forward and turned into a long arc 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet, 3,000 feet. When he flew 6,000 feet, sharp pain immediately shot through his legs, and they started burning. As his legs burned, the flames covered his entire body, and at that moment, Su Ming had already flown 8,000 feet. The instant the flames covered his entire body and charged toward his head, he had already arrived at the 9,000-foot mark. He lifted his burning right hand and burned his blood once again. With a hoarse roar, Su Ming instantly leapt through the 10,000 feet area and appeared at the other end of the green swamp within the Candle Dragon's body. The instant he stepped into the other end and took a few steps forward, due to inertia, cracking sounds immediately came from Su Ming's feet. Layers of ice covered his feet in the blink of an eye. All of this happened in the span of a breath, and Su Ming's body turned into an ice statue. That ice statue maintained his previous action of taking a step forward. At that moment, he stood there unmoving. Right before him was the tunnel leading to the Candle Dragon's carcass. Once it went through the heat phase, it started freezing, and at that moment, Su Ming's body turned into an ice statue the moment he came into contact with that freezing aura. 3 breaths later, sparks suddenly shone in Su Ming's eyes. At the same time, lightning sparks spread out from his spine through the layer of ice. Soon after, a whirlwind spread out from Su Ming's body with a bang, and as cracking sounds reverberated in the air, the ice statue instantly shattered to pieces. Su Ming took a step forward. Freezing air crashed into his face and seeped into his body. It immediately clashed against the heat from before, causing intense pain to shoot through his body with every single breath he took. However, compared to this pain, the suction force behind him and the roars echoing in his ears were what caught Su Ming's attention the most. It was not that he had not considered setting up some traps to stop them, but forget about the difficulty of setting up traps or runes in this place. These ferocious beasts were all born from the Candle Dragon's corpse, and they came and went without a trace. In fact, Su Ming had even seen the fog beast moving through the Candle Dragon's flesh and blood, and the Bone Fiend had also moved through the depths of the ground using bone spikes. Because of that, it was difficult to stop them. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He took a step forward and activated his extreme speed once again to charge forward while facing the freezing air. He did not know just how far he had traveled, neither did he know which part of the Candle Dragon he was in at that moment. All of his routes and his movements were based on the direction he could sense the small snake flying towards. As he moved forward, Su Ming's footsteps suddenly came to a halt. What made him stop in the middle of his charge was because he saw a frozen body on the wall of cold flesh to his right. It was a dried-up corpse, and his face could no longer be seen. However, he was wearing purple armor. That armor was shining with a purple light, and it was very eye-catching as it flashed. There were deep wounds all around the wall of flesh, and it was clear that these wounds were the injuries this person had inflicted on the Candle Dragon before he died. One of the wounds looked as if it had been torn open, and it was a terrifying sight to behold. If that was all, Su Ming would not have stopped moving. What truly made him stop was that the armor's appearance and presence gave him a strong sense of familiarity. This familiarity was not because he had seen this person before, but because this armor was practically the same as his berserker armor, except for its color. Su Ming's armor was an illusion. He would have to go to the Great Yu Dynasty to obtain the real berserker armor, and it was still unknown whether the Great Yu dynasty existed. However, the armor before Su Ming's eyes was real. The instant he saw the armor, Su Ming's heart pounded. This was the first thing that had tempted him ever since he came to the Candle Dragon's body. At that moment, the suction force and mumbling sounds behind him became stronger, and roars and growls followed. In fact, a large amount of bumps started squirming on the walls around him and the walls before Su Ming. Clearly, these ferocious beasts had caught up to him. Without a hint of hesitation, Su Ming took a step forward, and once he arrived beside the skeleton, he grabbed the purple armor. Yet the moment his hand touched the armor, the skeleton that Su Ming had thought to be dead suddenly lifted its right hand and seized Su Ming's wrist. At the same time, a faint, dark light shone in the eyes of the dried-up head. I found the third. It was also at that moment that something unexpected happened to the connection between Su Ming and the small snake in his mind, and it was abruptly cut off. At the same time, the black-robed man who had been following Su Ming all this while in the fog around the Candle Dragon's carcass was sitting in a corner. His eyes were sparkling, as if he was hesitating, but after a moment, he lifted his right hand and flipped it over. Immediately, a green jade slip appeared on his palm. This is the last Destiny Talisman Master left for me. The old man gritted his teeth and pressed the green jade slip to the center of his brows. Almost the instant he pressed the jade slip to the center of his brows, his body trembled viciously. Fog surrounded his eyes, and gradually, a picture appeared in his pupils. The person in that picture was Su Ming, who was in the Candle Dragon's body. This is the first time I came to Lijiang, and I'm suffering from altitude sickness. It's terrible. I panted as I finished typing. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 506. Su Ming's heart trembled. He had already checked the corpse with his divine sense and his gaze. He had no idea how many years it had been since the corpse had died, and its body had already dried up. Yet at that moment, when the corpse suddenly grabbed his arm, a huge storm raged in his heart. He was so shaken that he almost forgot about the ferocious beasts that were roaring and charging towards him from the distance. Su Ming's pupils shrank when he saw something that had suddenly appeared outside of his consciousness. I found the third. He's in it. A faint, dark light shone in the corpse's eyes, but before he could finish speaking, that light immediately faded away, and the dried-up hand that was grabbing Su Ming fell. Su Ming's heart trembled, but he did not have much time to think about it. Once he grabbed the corpse's armor, a transparent jade slip about the size of a palm flowed out of the corpse. Due to its transparency, it was difficult to discover it. Su Ming had only managed to catch a glimpse of it when he yanked off the purple armor. Without a hint of hesitation, he swept up the transparent jade slip with his arm and charged forward. The instant the squirming things crawled out of the walls around him, he immediately left into the distance. The moment he left, the bumps on the walls around him shattered, and ferocious beasts that were clearly different from the fog beasts Su Ming had seen previously rushed out while roaring. These ferocious beasts looked like pythons, but they had indistinct human faces. Forked tongues flicked out of their mouths, and a ghastly look appeared in their eyes. They slammed their tails against the ground and immediately flew up to chase after Su Ming. At the same time, the bone spikes on the ground exploded once they pierced through the ground and turned into small gray humanoids with long tails. Besides the slits for eyes and mouths, there was another slit at the top of their heads. That slit was now mostly torn open, as if there was something strange inside that wanted to crawl out of their skulls. Other than the fog beast and the bone fiend, the crying white figures that floated over behind them were also different. Their facial features were originally hidden under their hair and were somewhat blurry. However, at this moment, they all raised their heads and revealed their beautiful faces. The charm between their brows, in particular, was enough to cause people to become infatuated after looking at them. Su Ming could not see any of this. At that moment, he was charging forward at his fastest speed. He had already lost his connection with the small snake, and his heart was filled with anxiety, but he could still sense the final spot where his connection with the small snake had been cut off. As he continued charging forward, a long period of time passed by, and the tunnel before him immediately widened by a large margin. What appeared before Su Ming was a gigantic flesh hole that was as big as a field. This was the place where he had lost contact with the little snake. The moment he arrived, Su Ming saw a strange object that looked like the crown of a tree at the center of the gigantic hole. It was made up of thick black tendons intertwining with each other. At the top of the black tendon was a withered ball of flesh that was nearly 10,000 feet wide. The ball of flesh was filled with bumps, and it was grayish-black in color. Many parts of it had shriveled up. Su Ming also saw nearly 100 brilliant crystal shards floating above the ball of flesh. The crystal shards were of different sizes, but each of them exuded a feeling that made Su Ming's mind feel as if it was being sucked in when he looked at them. It was as if he was looking at another world. There were a total of 97 of these crystal shards. They floated around the ball of flesh, and if anyone took a closer look, they would be able to see black lines connecting these shards to the ball of flesh. Almost the instant Su Ming arrived, the gigantic ball of flesh shrank and instantly swelled up a little. It was facing Su Ming, and a crack slowly tore open on the ball of flesh. As that crack continued spreading outwards, Su Ming saw with just one glance that there was a head in the depths of that crack. It was a woman's head. She had long hair, but that was just her head. Her neck was made up of black tendons. At that moment, the woman's eyes were closed, and her face was pale. There was not a hint of life in her. There was a shining mark at the center of her brows, and the shape of that mark looked like a star. Su Ming's small snake floated quietly beside the woman's head. There was no sign of struggle on its face, only confusion. Wisps of white smoke seeped out of its body and seeped into the mark at the center of the woman's brows. This is the fate of the candles of darkness. You can't stop it. At the instant Su Ming saw the small snake, the ancient voice that had once spoken echoed in his ears. He could not tell whether the voice belonged to a man or a woman, but Su Ming could clearly tell that it was an old woman's voice. There is only a hint of the candles of darkness blood in its body, but as long as it has that blood, it will be one of us. This is fate. The candles of darkness will devour each other, and it ran into me now. This is fate. Before it lost its consciousness, its only wish was for its master to leave this place safely. You are its master. As long as you don't anger me during the sacred ceremony, then once the ceremony is over, I will let you leave safely. There was a merciless tone to that ancient voice as it echoed in Su Ming's head. Su Ming looked at the small snake, at its closed eyes, at its unmoving body, and he clenched his right fist. The divine general armor appeared once again, and when he clenched his right fist, he did not hold a fist, but an illusionary spiked club. The berserker mark on his face shone, and the 7 berserker bones in his body shone with a piercing golden light, causing Su Ming to look as if he was surrounded by golden light. At the same time, the nascent soul in his body also started forming seals with its hands. It might not have gone out, but Su Ming's Dantian region was already prepared for a huge battle. The small virescent sword flashed before Su Ming, and as that green light filled the air, Su Ming did not waste a single word. He took a step forward and charged toward the gigantic mass of flesh. I might only be a remnant of my will, but how dare an ant like you offend me? Flesh and blood in the fog, form your body with my will. As the ancient voice echoed in the air calmly, the python-like fog beasts among the endless amount of ferocious beasts chasing after Su Ming suddenly exploded as they roared. Once an unknown number of these fog beasts exploded, their bodies turned into pieces of rotting flesh and blood that appeared out of thin air before Su Ming, who was charging towards them. That flesh and blood swiftly gathered together to form a gigantic body that was 10,000 feet tall before Su Ming. That body was like a snake, and it was entirely crimson. It had a dragon's head, and it looked ferocious. Its eyes were gray, and each of its scales was the size of a head. An indescribable aura suddenly spread out from the body of this strange beast. Tormented spirit in my bones, form my bone veins with my will. The ancient voice appeared once again, and this time, the bone fiends that appeared behind Su Ming turned into sharp needles that charged towards the 10,000 feet body. They stabbed into its body, and the strange dragon snake started moving. The gray light in its eyes became even stronger. Spirit formed by my soul, form my soul with my will. The instant the ancient voice said those words, the white figures behind Su Ming fused together with piercing cries and charged towards the dragon snake. The instant they disappeared into its body, the dragon snake's eyes shone brilliantly, as if two moons and suns had lit up in its eyes. It let out a low roar towards the sky, and the gray light in its eyes shone. As if it had been revived, it charged towards Su Ming with a roar. Su Ming held the spike club in his right hand, and with a swing, the spike club grew several times larger before it swung towards the dragon snake. At the same time, Su Ming drew a line with his left hand with berserker obliteration. Soon after, the nascent soul in his body let out a piercing screech, and a large amount of ripples appeared in the area. All the divine abilities that the nascent soul could cast from Hong Luo's legacy were all executed at that instant. A violent boom reverberated in the area and spread out in all directions. Once that boom faded away, Su Ming's spike club was bounced off and fell to the side. All the divine abilities that his nascent soul had cast crumbled, causing his nascent soul to instantly wither away and look as if it was on the verge of dispersing. His divine general armor exploded, and his berserker obliteration was of no use at all. All of his techniques were rendered useless before this dragon snake. As the dragon snake closed in on him, Su Ming coughed up blood. His body was forced back 100-something feet due to the booming sounds, but there was not a hint of panic in his eyes. You're indeed very weak. No matter how much of your will you have left, you still can't hide your fear. As Su Ming laughed coldly, he lifted his right hand, formed a seal, and pointed forward. Immediately, Han Mountain Bell manifested. This time, Su Ming did not use any form of defense when Han Mountain Bell appeared. Instead, he used his strongest sixth head's power. If Su Ming had not seen the white figure screaming and retreating when he summoned the nine-headed dragon's sixth head when he was in the world outside, and if the small snake had not let out a wary roar when he first summoned the nine-headed dragon, that scene of it looking as if it had run into its mortal enemy had left a deep impression on him. If that had not been the case, then he would have been hesitant once he entered the candle dragon's body and would not have known how to fight against the candle dragon's will, even though it was already dead. Yet all of these were just ifs. Nine-headed dragon, Southern Emperor's ability. Once Su Ming's Han Mountain Bell appeared, he lifted his right hand, formed a seal, and pointed forward. He did not even bother wiping off the blood at the corners of his lips, but instead let out a low murmur, and Han Mountain Bell immediately let out a powerful roar. The instant that roar reverberated in the air, a wary look appeared on the 10,000 feet dragon snake's face. It even let out a roar, and it looked exactly the same as the small snake in the past. It looked as if it had run into its mortal enemy. You should have noticed it when I cast this in the world outside. You did everything in your power to have those ferocious beasts stop me and kill me when I entered your dead body, because you were weak. Perhaps I might not be able to fight against you, but I have something here that makes you afraid. This is it. As Su Ming spoke, the roars from Han Mountain Bell became even stronger. At the same time, the gigantic nine-headed beast that was 10,000 feet tall manifested on Han Mountain Bell. 6 of its heads roared at the dragon snake at the same time, and the remaining 3 sleeping heads also started trembling faintly. By the looks of it, the nine-headed dragon's spirit's expression and gaze were filled with wariness and hatred, as if the candle dragon was also its mortal enemy. Nine-headed dragon. Nine-headed dragon. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. I don't want to come to Lijiang anymore. I'll gasp for breath with just a few steps, and I have to take medicine to prevent altitude sickness every single day. The prices in the hotels are also incredibly expensive. It was already very late on the day I came, and I had to spend 200-something on a few bowls of noodles. I'm going to faint. Riding in the Highlands is really torturous. Please recommend me. I really want to explode. I really do, but I'm not in the right place at the right time. I'll wrap my fist in my palm and apologize. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 507. Being outside, I suffered from altitude sickness, but I still persisted in writing every day. Even now, I'm still working on Chapter 468. Even though it's only one chapter a day, Jin has really exhausted all his energy. I crave for recommendation votes. I desperately need them. Fellow Taoists, please satisfy me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 508. Nine-Headed Dragon. That ancient voice reverberated in the air in a low voice. I've always wanted to ask the rulers above the universe why the world must have earth after the sky appeared. Why must ice and water appear after fire appeared in this world? I also want to ask the universe why the nine-headed dragon tribe was born when we, the Candle Dragon tribe, were born. I searched my entire life, but I still couldn't find the answer. Once ice and fire fused together, burning water appeared, freezing fire appeared, and a type of air that is different from ice and fire appeared. Once the sky and earth fused together, what appeared was a gray sky, destroyed emptiness, and the power of an entire world appeared. Then what appeared when the Candle Dragon and the nine-headed dragon fused together? What is it? What is it? What is it? Towards the end, the voice sounded as if it had gone mad, and its roars reverberated in the air. At the same time, the 10,000 feet dragon snake also roared with a ferocious look on its face. With madness, it charged towards the nine-headed dragon. Su Ming's nine-headed dragon roared as well, and without Su Ming needing to control it, all 6 of its heads roared and charged towards the dragon snake. Booming sounds reverberated in all directions. The Candle Dragon was already dead, and the one that appeared now was the one that was forcefully fused together with its remaining will. The difference between it and its original body was like the difference between heaven and earth. Similarly, Su Ming's nine-headed dragon's spirit no longer had a body. It was only a spirit, the vessel spirit of Han Mountain Bell. It had been asleep for many years, and since only 6 of its heads had woken up, that was why its power was much weaker than when it was alive. Because of that, it could be said to be on equal footing with the dragon snake. These 2 powerful beasts that treated each other as their mortal enemy started fighting madly against each other. Su Ming stood there, and for an instant, a dazed look appeared in his eyes. What made him dazed was the words the ancient voice had said previously. When those words echoed in Su Ming's head, he felt as if he had understood something, but when he thought about it carefully, he found that he could not understand it. The fusion of ice and fire, the fusion of the sky and earth. This feeling was the same as when he had spoken to Tian Xiazi on the 9th summit all those years ago. He had spent several months in epiphany on the platform outside his cave abode, and in the end, he had come to understand his creation. Once he understood the art of clearing his mind and drew berserker obliteration, his strokes were exactly the same. At that moment, Su Ming's eyes became even more dazed. The ancient voice's words continued echoing in his head. Su Ming had a strong feeling that if he understood it completely this time, then he would be in control of an unimaginable power. Yet at that moment, he bit down on the tip of his tongue. The epiphany this time might be valuable, but the timing was incredibly bad. If he continued trying to gain that epiphany, then besides death, Su Ming could not think of anything else that would happen to him. That was why, even though this state was a pity, Su Ming had to wake himself up before he could completely immerse himself in it. As he did so, he heard a shocking roar in his ears. The dragon snake and the nine-headed dragon were fighting madly against each other in midair. The battle between these 2 mortal enemies had reached its most intense state. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He turned into a long arc, and when he took a step forward, He bypassed the dragon snake and the nine-headed dragon, who were fighting against each other, and charged towards a gigantic mass of flesh floating in midair. Not a single hint of change could be detected on the beautiful woman's face within a mass of flesh. The small snake before her continued spreading out fine white threads, and they were all absorbed by the mark at the center of the woman's brows. Killing intent shone in Su Ming's eyes. He took a step forward, and the instant he got close to the mass of flesh, it immediately started squirming furiously. At the same time, the ancient voice traveled forth languidly. I will grant you a long life, so that you will not be destroyed, even if the world crumbles and the universe declines, just like me. Do you want it? I will grant you endless power, so that your physical body will be on par with mine, so that you will be able to break through the laws of this world and step into the endless void. You will be able to see the wider world and the galaxy. Do you want it? I will also grant you an unlimited amount of power, so that your eyes will become the brightest stars in the universe, so that all those who see your eyes will worship you. Do you want it? I will grant you the power to control the power of an entire world, so that you can become a powerful warrior and do everything you want to do. Do you want it? I will grant you the power to tear through the fog, so that you will understand what is above the heavens, so that you will see what is under the ground, so that your life will be in your hands, and no one else will be able to control it. Do you want it? When the ancient voice traveled forth, Su Ming's footsteps came to a halt for a moment when he heard it. You must have had dreams and desires before. I can help you fulfill them, so that you will possess the power to fulfill your dreams and desires. You will find your dreams. You will tear apart the sky that covers your eyes. You will control your own fate. You will crush all your enemies before you. I can do it. Trust me, I can really do it. I am the candle dragon. I am the strongest among the candle dragons. When I was alive, I could make 100 worlds turn dark in an instant, and I could devour more than 1 billion lives. As long as I wake up, as long as I am resurrected, I can swear on my people that I will definitely complete everything I said. As long as you don't disturb my people's ritual, as long as you stay back now and don't get closer. If you agree, then I will fulfill my oath. A bang went off in Su Ming's head, and his breathing quickened. He stared at the woman's face. The sincerity in her words made it impossible for anyone to doubt her words. He did not care about an immortal life, did not care about an infinite number of souls, but he cared about what was above the heavens. He cared about controlling his own fate. He cared about tearing apart the sky that covered his eyes, searching for Dark Mountain, and finding the true source of destiny. All of these were things he longed for even in his dreams. If you don't believe me, then I can acknowledge you as my master, but the process is split into two parts. The first part is the beginning. If we do everything according to our promise, then once I am resurrected, we will complete the second step. I will definitely do everything I promised. You will only lose a young snake with an impure bloodline, but in exchange, I will be yours. Su Ming fell silent. After a long while, he shook his head. I don't believe you. The instant he said those words, he charged towards the woman's head in the mass of flesh. Why don't you believe me? Everything I said is true. As long as I am resurrected, I will definitely do it. You're not the first person I've made such a promise to. There was another person before you, and he received my promise. I don't know his name, but the feeling of his blood is somewhat similar to yours. He called himself the third god of berserkers. It was also at that moment that the black-robed old man who had just cast the final destiny talisman was sitting in the endless fog around the candle dragon's gigantic carcass. His eyes were shining with the scenes that Su Ming was going through at that moment. The old man in black robes had used a unique method to see everything that had happened after Su Ming entered the candle dragon's body. A glint appeared in his eyes, and a strange smile suddenly appeared on his lips. The candle dragon's remnant will. It might be strong, but now it has to devour its descendant and is facing destiny. Perhaps I can use it. The old man in black robes' smile grew brighter. Destiny has that crimson dragon and that old spirit of 9 in this place. Even if I attack, it'll be difficult for me to bring order out of chaos and make him continue on his path of destiny. Only when he's in the candle dragon's body can I avoid that crimson dragon. But I can't enter the candle dragon's body either. I can only see it through the destiny talisman. The old man licked his lips, and the reflection of Su Ming in his pupils distorted for a moment. But if I offer up my power as an offering to this destiny talisman, I can cast some divine abilities. These divine abilities might not be able to complete my original plan and make destiny fall asleep, but I can use them to stimulate the candle dragon's will and make it activate the undying and imperishable world to turn into a cage to seal destiny. By doing so, he'll be forcefully kept here, just like how I planned for him to fall asleep, and I'll have enough time to wait for Master's second projection to descend. If that's the case, then I'll have done a great deed. As the old man in black robe smiled, he lifted his right hand and pointed at the green jade slip at the center of his brows. That jade slip shuddered, and a ball of black threads spread out from its edges. Those black threads spread out rapidly, and in the blink of an eye, they covered his entire face. There were even more black threads at the edges of his eyes, and as they spread out, they entered the old man's eyes. They replaced the blood capillaries in his eyes. At the same time they turned black, they also covered his pupils. Su Ming's reflection could be vaguely seen in them, and his figure also became much more indistinct. At the same time, the green color of the jade slip rapidly faded away, and when it turned black, it exploded with a bang. At the instant it turned into powder, the old man in black robes opened his mouth and let out a breath. Once he exhaled, that breath turned into black fog and disappeared into thin air. The instant Su Ming heard the candle dragon mention the third god of berserkers, his heart trembled, but he did not stop moving. He charged straight into the depths of the mass of flesh and clenched his right hand into a fist. A powerful force burst forth from the 7 berserker bones in his body, and he rammed his fist against the head of the woman who was absorbing the white threads from a small snake. It was also at that moment that a gust of wind appeared out of nowhere at the edge of the gigantic mass of flesh, a spot Su Ming could not see. A layer of black fog appeared along with the wind and floated gently into the gigantic mass of flesh before disappearing inside. All of this happened in an instant, and it ended in the blink of an eye. Recommendation votes. Recommendation votes. Recommendation votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 509. Su Ming did not believe in everything the candle dragon said. However, even if he did believe in it, it would still be difficult for him to watch his snake being devoured just for the sake of obtaining great power and a great serendipity. When a man lives in the world, he must live with a clear conscience. I, Su Ming, desire power, desire to tear apart fate with my own hands, but if I can give up on my snake today to obtain these things, then tomorrow I will also give up on everything else for my desire to become even stronger. After giving up time and time again, perhaps the next thing I will give up on will be Dark Mountain. The next thing will be my dream, and the next thing will be my memories. Even if I give up on everything at that time, will I still be me? I desire power, desire to become stronger, but the source of all this is that I will not give up on anything. With my heart, even if I turn into a fiend, even if my hands are stained with blood, I will still have a clear conscience. A voice that belonged to Su Ming was mumbling softly in his heart. He had been searching for Dark Mountain all this while, but if he gave up on Dark Mountain in the process of searching for it, then he would have lost his own soul. Some of his memories had awakened. The woman's faint call would occasionally appear in his mind. If he had to give up on that voice calling out to him to obtain something, then what would he do? There were some things that once happened once, they would happen a second time, a third time. He did not stop for even a single moment. He hurled his fist straight towards the woman's head. The instant it closed in, an illusory layer of ripples suddenly appeared around the beautiful head, and it was soon followed by a light chuckle that came from within the gigantic mass of flesh that reverberated in all directions. At the same time, the instant Su Ming's fist landed on the head turned invisible in the blink of an eye and disappeared without a trace, disappearing right before Su Ming's eyes. That head was clearly not the candle dragon's real body, but an illusion. Its goal was to attract Su Ming's attention, and from there, it would buy more time for it to devour the snake. However, the candle dragon's remaining will clearly did not expect that Su Ming would be so decisive and swift in his attack without much hesitation, causing the time it bought to be far from enough. Su Ming's expression remained the same. There was not a hint of shock on his face due to the head's sudden disappearance. In truth, he had long since noticed that there was something strange about the head's appearance. After all, the head was hidden in the mass of flesh, and there was no need for it to reveal itself the moment Su Ming arrived. Its goal was clearly to attract all of Su Ming's attention. That was why the instant Su Ming hurled his fist forward, he spread his divine sense outwards, and soon after, the lightning berserker bone on his spine started flashing with powerful lightning arcs. As they swam through Su Ming's entire body, they spread outwards. An endless amount of lightning erupted from within Su Ming's body. Those bolts of lightning charged into the gigantic ball of flesh around him along with his divine sense and swept through it like a huge wave, searching for the candle dragon's remaining will. His wind berserker bone also let out a powerful force of wind at that moment, causing a whirlwind to stir up around Su Ming out of nowhere. That whirlwind became stronger, and a brilliant glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. The instant the dragon snake and the nine-headed dragon's battle reached its peak in the distance, that whirlwind started charging madly in all directions, with Su Ming as its center. It was as if there were several huge hands pushing away the mass of flesh. Thunder rumbled, violent gusts of wind moaned, and the mass of flesh around Su Ming was immediately blown away like smoke by the wind and split apart by lightning. It was also at that instant that the gigantic mass of flesh rapidly turned black for some unknown reason as it split apart and spread apart, as if it had been dyed by ink. Su Ming did not have time to bother with this. That was why, as his divine sense and the lightning whirlwind spread outwards, he immediately saw the small snake's presence at a certain spot within the mass of flesh. Without any hesitation, Su Ming immediately charged towards the spot where the small snake's presence came from. In the blink of an eye, he closed in on it, but the instant he did so, a piercing howl rushed into Su Ming's mind. That piercing howl came from the spot where Su Ming had sensed the small snake's presence. It came from the head of the beautiful woman floating beside the small snake. That head still had her eyes closed, and she did not open them either. However, when she opened her mouth, that piercing howl was like a charge that caused Su Ming's heart to tremble, and an illusion appeared before his eyes. In that illusion, his body was incredibly small. Before him was a gigantic candle dragon whose body was so big that it could not be described with words. It looked like a gigantic city. The candle dragon had its mouth wide open and was roaring towards him with a murderous aura and bloodlust that surged into the sky. That scene made it seem as if the sky was pressing down on him, wanting to destroy all lives. As Su Ming's heart trembled, he bit the tip of his tongue. As sharp pain traveled through his body, the candle dragon's gigantic body before him started showing signs of shattering. The woman's beautiful head was hidden within that illusion. Her eyes were closed, but when she opened her mouth, sharp, poisonous fangs could be seen. There was also a forked tongue hissing as it charged toward Su Ming. After all, the candle dragon's will was a remnant, and it had lost quite a lot of its will over the years. Right then, most of its will was focused on the dragon snake fighting against the nine-headed dragon. That was why when Su Ming regained his senses, he saw some of the flaws in the illusion, and he saw the head hidden under it. Su Ming's pupils shrank, and he lifted his right hand swiftly. During the process, a large amount of lightning erupted from the lightning berserker bone on his spine, as if Su Ming had just swung his arm. At the same time, the lightning that had just spread out in the area just now also rapidly gathered together, causing Su Ming's right hand to look as if it was covered in lightning. Lightning Berserker's first move. Su Ming let out a low growl. This was the divine ability unique to the Lightning Berserker he had sensed when he forcefully absorbed the lightning crystal of inheritance. As his words reverberated in the air, the lightning that covered Su Ming's right hand increased exponentially and turned into half a lightning-long blade. That blade was formed by lightning and was about several dozens of feet long. The air around its edges started twisting, and as thunder rumbled in the air, it sliced down on the incoming woman's head. At that instant, Su Ming's expression suddenly changed. The woman's head's expression also changed drastically, because at the spot where Su Ming had sensed the strange small snake's presence, a wisp of black mist appeared out of thin air at the spot behind the head, which was the most important spot to it. It turned into a gigantic hand that seized the small snake that was floating there, deep in sleep. All of this happened too quickly. Su Ming's Lightning Berserker first move had already crashed into the woman's head. As booming sounds reverberated in the air, a long string of laughter immediately spread through the air. As it did so, an old man in black robes appeared. That old man was holding the sleeping snake tightly in his hand, and his eyes were sparkling. "If either of you dare move, I'll crush this snake." As the old man in black robes spoke, he tightened his right hand, and the snake's body instantly started twisting and trembling. The instant the old man in black robes squeezed the snake, the balls of flesh that had changed color around the snake froze, and a piercing howl immediately tumbled out of the woman's mouth. Killing intent shone in Su Ming's eyes as he glared at the old man. This person's appearance was incredibly sudden. He had suddenly appeared while Su Ming was fighting against the candle dragon, and for some unknown reason, Su Ming had a strange feeling that made him want to kill this person. "I'm just a wisp of divine sense. Even if I die here, it won't affect my real body too much. Destiny, you're very fast. I'd advise you not to act recklessly." Candle Dragon, you don't have much of your will left, but I'm confident that I can kill this snake before you attack. Do you believe me? When he heard the word destiny, Su Ming's pupils shrank. After the woman's head let out a piercing howl, she spoke in a ghastly voice. "Tell me your request." "Candle Dragon, I don't want to be your enemy. I want you to cast the undying and imperishable world on him and seal him inside. After that, I'll immediately return this snake that's incredibly important to you." The old man in black robes smiled darkly and tightened his grip a little more, causing the unconscious snake's body to twist even more in pain. A large amount of white wisps of smoke also spread out from its body and floated around the area. A glint appeared in the eyes of the woman's head. If she cast the undying and imperishable world with her remaining will, she would fall into deep sleep, and she would need many years before she could wake up a little. Unless it was absolutely necessary, she would not cast this art. Besides, she would not be able to absorb the small snake while she was asleep. She could only continue after she woke up. Since you insist on doing this, and since you insist on interfering in this matter, then I'll let the undying and imperishable world decide your life and death. I'll curse you with all my remaining will. The beautiful head looked toward Su Ming, and for the first time, she opened her eyes to reveal a pair of gray eyes, along with 9 pupils that formed some sort of runic symbol. 9 pupils. I curse you for your souls to be separated from your bodies. I curse you for your souls to enter my world. I curse you for your souls to sink into the undying and imperishable world, and for all eternity, never to be reincarnated. I curse you for your souls to be lost for an endless amount of time, and for you to become my new war soul. If you sink into oblivion, then I will devour you and be resurrected successfully. If you wake up, then I will willingly be devoured by my own kind and bless it with new life. Undying and imperishable world, 1 billion vengeful spirits. Awaken. The instant that piercing voice rang in the air, the candle dragon's entire body shuddered. It caused the fog in the area of several tens of thousands of leagues around it to become much thicker. At the same time, its gigantic body started petrifying at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, Its gigantic body turned into a gigantic stone statue right before the crimson dragon and the old spirit of 9 Yin's dumbfounded gazes. Soon after, the shadow of a crescent moon appeared out of nowhere in the sky. That shadow gradually shone with a strange and enchanting light. It hung high in the night sky, and when compared to the 9 moons around it, it turned into the 10th crescent moon in the sky. At that moment, this crescent moon was seen by Shaman City, all the spirits of 9 Yin, and all the living beings in the world of 9 Yin within the 1 million lease and beyond the 1 million lease. The candle dragon petrifies. The 10th moon. This is the sign that the sacred 9 Yin's undying and imperishable world has been activated. As long as this moon does not disappear, then this world will exist forever. The old spirit of 9 Yin mumbled, "I'll return home tomorrow night, and I'll resume updating the game the day after tomorrow." To be continued. If you like this work, then please come to Start Point and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 510. When I get home tomorrow, I'll resume updating on Tuesday. I made everyone suffer during this period of time. Don't worry, I'll give everyone a satisfactory explanation. Speaking of today, I still have lingering fears. In the afternoon, when I was on the plane from Lijiang, I experienced the most terrifying thing in my life. At that time, the first reaction in my mind was that I'm done for, I'm going to die. Poor me, I haven't even finished writing. At that time, third young master, Qindong, and I were on the same plane. That plane was originally flying fine, but suddenly, the entire plane seemed to have been ruthlessly smashed by a hammer. It suddenly sank a few meters and then violently bounced back up. The entire plane was beating violently. At that time, my heart was about to jump out. The cabin shook violently, and the lights seemed to be flashing. My mind was blank. The air stewardesses all fell to the ground. Those who didn't fall were also deathly pale. There was an auntie next to me who grabbed my arm and almost scratched it. Later on, when I recovered a little, she told me about the time when they were flying to America. Out of the 4 engines, 2 were broken. Then, the air stewardesses gave them pen and paper to write their last words. After that, Chundong said that my face was deathly pale. In reality, when I saw him, his eyes were wide open, and his hands were tightly gripping the armrests of his seat. Third young master was the calmest. He said that the plane to Yunnan was like this, and that it was a small matter. I suspect that he was also very nervous after I got off the plane. I still had lingering fears. Mother Kerr, I was scared to death. Begging for recommendation votes. Begging for all kinds of comfort because I have to fly back to Mudanjiang tomorrow. I'm really scared. Begging for recommendation votes. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for recommendation votes or monthly votes. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 511. Almost at the instant the 10th moon appeared in the sky of the world of 9 the old man in black who was hiding in the fog and meditating outside the candle dragon's rapidly petrifying carcass shuddered violently. He swiftly opened his eyes and coughed up a large mouthful of blood. When he coughed up the blood, it was still bright red, but it soon turned black. When it landed on the ground before him, it let out sizzling sounds. The old man's face was pale, and not a hint of blood could be seen on his face. A spot the size of a fingernail on his forehead had also turned black. That black color was still slowly spreading out, and a foul stench spread out from that black area, as if something was rotting. What a powerful curse! The old man mumbled to himself in a hoarse voice. His voice was weak, and at the instant he said those words, the black mark on his forehead had already expanded and covered his entire forehead. The foul stench of rotting became even stronger, and the old man's expression changed. He lifted his right hand and formed a seal before he swiftly tapped the center of his brows. However, at the instant his finger touched the center of his brows, his body shuddered again, and he coughed up 3 mouthfuls of blood. Degenerate and become a celestial, the Tao of immortals fuse with the years, the changes of time. When the old man said those words with great difficulty, his hands swiftly formed seals before him, and he continuously tapped his body. The black mark on his face had already expanded and covered his entire face, and it was spreading towards his neck. As he said those words and formed those seals, the old man's body swiftly withered. Almost in the blink of an eye, he turned into a dried-up corpse. That dried-up corpse looked stiff, and it sat there cross-legged. Due to its life force dispersing, the black mark on its face did not continue spreading. After a moment, cracking sounds came from the dried-up corpse that the old man had turned into. Immediately after, a crack appeared at the center of the old man's brows. That crack swiftly expanded, and two hands stretched out from within. They tore at it, and a cracking sound rang in the air. A large portion of the crack on the dried-up corpse was torn open from within, revealing two complete arms. Behind those arms was a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 40s or 50s. The man was completely naked, and he looked as if he had just crawled out of the dried corpse. As he continued to tear it open, his body suddenly walked out of the dried corpse that was the old man. The middle-aged man's appearance was very similar to the black-robed old man, as if it was him from many years ago. However, in terms of aura, the middle-aged man was much weaker than the black-robed old man. When he walked out, he was panting heavily, but there was a smile on his lips. Destiny is perfectly trapped in the undying and imperishable world, and my mission has been completed perfectly. I only need to wait for Master's clone to descend, and I'll be able to make a great contribution here. Although this curse is strong, it can't do anything to me. I've already planned for this. The middle-aged man was filled with complacency. However, as soon as he finished muttering to himself, his expression suddenly changed drastically. This was because he could clearly sense that a black mark had appeared between his brows. Terror appeared on the middle-aged man's face. He lifted his right hand and instinctively pressed it against the black mark between his brows. He touched something sticky, and when he lifted his hand, some sticky black threads were pulled out, and a rotten stench assaulted his nostrils. This divine ability that Master taught me can even avoid heaven's retribution. This candle dragon's curse, it's actually... The middle-aged man's expression became even more terrified. He quickly sat down cross-legged and cast the same divine ability again. His body swiftly turned into a dried-up corpse, and very soon, a crack appeared at the center of the corpse's brows. In an instant, it spread out from the center of his body, and a low growl came from the crack. Soon, a man who looked to be in his 30s crawled out from the crack. The ripples of his cultivation base became much weaker. His appearance was similar to that of the black-robed old man, but he looked much younger. However, at the center of his brows, the moment he walked out, the black mark that seemed to have seeped into his bones appeared once more. At that moment, this place was very strange. If anyone else saw this, they would definitely be shocked. Beside the man were two dried-up corpses with huge cracks at the center of their bodies. One of them was an old man, and he was still sitting cross-legged. However, if anyone took a closer look, they would find that his body was empty, and he was just a human shell. As for the middle-aged man who was sitting cross-legged, he was also a dried-up corpse. His body was also empty, just like a layer of skin. The man beside him had a pale face, and his eyes were filled with disbelief and monstrous terror. Damn it, how could this be? I've clearly separated myself from that divine sense, and I shouldn't have been too deeply affected by it, but the man shuddered, and the black mark at the center of his brows expanded slightly. At that moment, it looked like it was the size of a baby's palm. I must find a way to break this curse as soon as possible. It's a curse. Damn it. I don't know much about this strange and ancient divine ability. How am I supposed to break it? The man's face was pale. He leapt forward and charged into the distance. As he moved forward, he coughed out a few mouthfuls of blood, and the black mark on his face became even bigger. He would not be mentioned for the time being. All the rotting flesh and bones within the petrified candle dragon's body had completely solidified and turned into gray stones. It did not matter whether it was the candle dragon's eyes or the ferocious beasts, all of them had turned into stone. It was especially so for the area around its head. In the midst of the silence, there were two gigantic stone statues. One of them was the dragon snake, and the other was Su Ming's nine-headed dragonhawn mountain bell. They were still in the position they were in before they were petrified, and there was a murderous look on their faces. They were in the midst of a battle of life and death. Even if they had been petrified, when anyone looked at them, they could still feel the murderous aura crashing into their faces. The gigantic mass of flesh that had been spreading outwards in the area previously had also turned into a stone statue. Su Ming stood by its side, unmoving. His eyes were closed, and his body had already turned into stone. Everything about him had turned into stone, including his clothes, hair, and all the other things. He looked no different from a stone. In fact, the hint of tenacity on his face had been clearly frozen, and he looked as if he was alive. The small snake and the body formed by the black-robed old man's divine sense had also turned into stone statues. The existence of these stone statues within the petrified candle dragon's body caused the place to be filled with a strange and deathly stillness. The only thing that had not turned into stone was the head of the woman of unparalleled beauty floating in midair. Her breath had completely disappeared. Her eyes were wide open, and there was not a hint of life within them. However, if anyone took a closer look, they would be able to see a faint vortex spinning slowly in her right eye. That vortex was the candle dragon's undying and imperishable world. That vortex was the pride of its life. That vortex was the source of its pride, even though it had become incredibly weak when it faced the black-robed old man's threat. Members of the candle dragon's bloodline could die, but even if they died, they would not be threatened by a normal person. Even if they died, they would choose to die while being devoured by their own kind. All those who tried to control its thoughts would suffer from its powerful curse, and it was a curse that would still strike fear into all those who saw it. Even if it was already dead, it lived by devouring its own kind, because it believed that it was the only one who could ensure that the candle dragon's bloodline would exist forever. However, if fate forced it to run into its own kind that it could not devour, then it would willingly use everything it had to give its own kind a new life. All of this was because of its own kind. All of this was because of the unique legacy of the candle dragon's bloodline. If anyone magnified the vortex in its right eye, then they would be able to see an innumerable amount of illusory figures within, and one of them was Su Ming. His body drifted about, and he looked like a wandering soul. His eyes were gray, and there was not a hint of intelligence within them. There was only an endless amount of confusion. He had no consciousness, as if his soul was in deep sleep and could not wake up. At that moment, he could not even be considered to have any instincts. He could only continue drifting about in this boundless world. There was a large amount of wandering souls floating about like him around him. There seemed to be thousands of them, and almost all of their eyes were gray. They did not have intelligence, and neither did they possess any instincts. They only had that piercing howl, and they were forced to obey. Right in front of this group of wandering souls was a soul whose body was clearly larger than the other vengeful souls. There was a small amount of black smoke spreading out from that soul's body, and from the distance, he gave off a murderous aura. His eyes might also be gray, but there was a hint of intelligence within them. As he let out that piercing howl, the large group of vengeful souls behind him closed in on him, and all of them were sucked dry once the powerful vengeful soul caught them. Once hundreds of vengeful souls were sucked dry, another piercing howl came from the distance. Soon after, thousands of vengeful souls appeared in the direction where that howl came from. The one in the lead was the soul of a man with a ghost face, and his entire body was surrounded by black smoke. A battle between vengeful souls was carried out just like that. When Su Ming opened his eyes, he was still not fully conscious. There was only an intense pain that made him feel as if his entire body was being torn apart. It made him grit his teeth and not scream. That pain made him feel as if his body had turned into a leaf that was being torn apart bit by bit. Once it was torn into pieces, it would be gripped tightly, and it would feel as if his bones were being crushed. If he screamed under that pain, perhaps he would not be able to wake up. It was precisely because he endured that pain that his eyes seemed to have mobilized all his strength in the indescribable pain. It was as if there were countless voices roaring in his ears, roaring in his soul, calling out continuously. It made him feel as if he had opened his eyes once again. He opened them abruptly. The moment he truly opened his eyes, he saw the gray sky, the white ground, and the world that had been torn apart for an unknown amount of time. I'm about to board the plane. It's estimated that I'll only be home after 11 p.m. I finished writing this chapter at the airport. I'll update it tomorrow. Everyone, do you still have recommendation votes? To be continued. If you like this work, please come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 512. The pale sky looked like a gray cloth that was spread out at the end of Su Ming's sight. There was no sun, no moon, and no stars in the sky. There was only a gray color that made people feel oppressed. There was a scent of death in that color, causing all those who saw it to feel as if they were lost in that gray color, and their hearts would also be lost. The white land rose and fell into the distance. There were no plants, no other colors. There was only white earth, and it spread out endlessly until there was no end to it. If anyone looked at it for a long period of time, they would feel even more lost when they saw the gray sky. Su Ming opened his eyes. This was what he saw. After a long while, he lowered his head and looked at his own body. He could clearly see that his body was an illusion and was formed by a wisp of white fog that spread out from the ground. That fog was very weak in the beginning, but soon it slowly gathered together to form a person. A large amount of fog seeped out from the white land around him. As that fog gathered together, more people slowly appeared. These people looked as if they had been reborn. Their eyes were gray, and those gray eyes gave off a feeling of despair and exhaustion that came from the soul. It was as if they had died an endless amount of times, but they would still be reborn, and in the end, they would still die over and over again, forming a cycle. Perhaps, sometimes, death wasn't scary. What was scary was the never-ending, undying, indestructible existence, until even the soul became numb, until it lost consciousness, until it lost everything and became an undying soul, an indestructible walking corpse. An unknown amount of time had passed since Su Ming woke up in the place where thousands of undying souls had fought. This battle might have happened a few breaths ago, or a few days ago, or even a few months ago. Su Ming did not know how long it had been. He only knew that when he woke up, this was what he saw in front of him. Su Ming might have woken up, but he was still a little lost in his heart. His eyes were still gray, and there was not much intelligence left in them. He did not know who he was, neither did he know why he appeared in this place. In fact, he did not even think about any of this. His mind was blank. He stared at the gray sky with a dumbfounded expression. He continued watching until the fog gradually gathered together to form his complete body. When all the undying souls around him also gathered together, these undying souls were the same as Su Ming. They all stood there with their heads lifted to look at the sky in a daze, with blank expressions on their faces. Just like that, an unknown amount of time passed. Finally, one day, the sound of a bugle horn rang out from somewhere in the distance. It was a very faint sound, but it was impossible to tell how far it had traveled. The instant the sound of the horn rang out, the thousands of undying souls immediately trembled. They lowered their heads and looked into the distance. Slowly, they lifted their feet and floated in the air as they slowly moved forward. Su Ming could also hear the sound of the horn when he was among the undying souls. When that sound fell into his heart, it turned into a call that made his soul tremble. He, too, no longer looked at the sky. Instead, he looked towards the direction where the sound of the horn was coming from. He had no idea how far away he was from where he was, and he slowly floated forward with the undying souls beside him. They floated for an unknown amount of time. Su Ming's mind no longer had any concept of time. The only thing that existed in his mind was the sound of the horn calling out to him. The undying souls continued floating forward as if there was no end to them. Gradually, some of the undying souls among them let out shrill howls as they floated in the air. As the howls became more and more frequent, one day, one of the undying souls suddenly turned around and pounced on his companion, who still had a dazed look in his eyes, biting, devouring, fusing with him. After a moment, as one of the undying souls disappeared, the other one's body became much more corporeal. A faint hint of intelligence appeared in the gray light in his eyes. Almost the instant he devoured his companion, quite a number of other undying souls around him did the same thing. There was one such undying soul besides Su Ming. That soul looked like an old man. As he roared, he charged towards Su Ming like a wild beast. Once he got closer, he pounced on him and opened his mouth wide, wanting to bite and devour Su Ming. Su Ming did not fight back. There was a dazed look in his eyes as he simply allowed the undying soul to bite and devour him. The intense pain that came from his soul made Su Ming tremble. The feeling as if his body was about to be torn apart made him suddenly remember that before he woke up, he seemed to have gone through the same kind of pain. So, I've already died once, Su Ming mumbled. Half of his body had already been devoured by the old man. By the looks of it, before long, his entire body would be completely devoured. At that time, everything about Su Ming would disappear into thin air, but he would not die. Instead, after some time had passed, he would once again be manifested from the fog on the undying and indestructible land, and he would go through the same death once again. He would continue going through it, and the cycle would repeat itself endlessly. I've gone through this feeling before. I don't want to go through it again. Su Ming's consciousness gradually faded away, but a brutal look appeared in his eyes. He turned around swiftly and started devouring the old man as well. The act of these two undying souls devouring each other was everything to them, but to the thousands of undying souls around them, it did not attract even a single bit of their attention. Time trickled by slowly. Once the undying souls, who clearly had a hint of intelligence, devoured a few of their companions, they seemed to have reached saturation. Their bodies became much more corporeal, and they lifted their heads and let out shrill roars towards the sky. Their roars reverberated continuously on the empty land, as if they were using their voices to announce their new lives. As the roars increased in number, a total of 27 of the thousands of undying souls let out the roars of new lives one after another. As they roared, the other undying souls around them started trembling, and fear appeared on their faces. It was as if the level of these 27 souls had already surpassed them, causing them to feel a sense of oppression and fear in their souls no matter how numb they were. As for the old man who was devouring each other with Su Ming, he was roaring madly and fighting against Su Ming in a brutal manner. Gradually, as Su Ming continued devouring, the old man gradually became weaker, and eventually, his entire soul turned into nutrients for Su Ming to become stronger. Once Su Ming devoured the first undying soul, his body started trembling faintly. He could feel a wave of power swelling up within him. That power crashed into his body until it rushed into his mind, causing struggle to appear in Su Ming's eyes. A pain, as if he was being torn apart, reverberated in his heart. As the feeling of being torn apart grew stronger, Su Ming felt as if his mind was about to crumble. As he crumbled, he gradually remembered some things from his empty memories. "What is my name?" Su Ming lifted his head swiftly and let out a roar towards the sky. That roar was the 28th roar of a new life in the land. His roar resonated with the 27 souls and gradually fused together, shaking the sky and earth in that small area, causing the other undying souls in the area to kneel down on the ground as they trembled. Only the 28 souls, including Su Ming, remained standing in that area. At first glance, the 28 souls looked incredibly similar, but as they continued devouring, They would slowly change and become different, and they would slowly remember all their memories at that moment. The sound of the horn in the world came from the distance once again. As the moaning sound reverberated in the air, Su Ming's roars gradually stopped. The other 27 souls also slowly calmed down, and with a speed that was much faster than that of a normal soul, they floated forward. Su Ming's eyes were gray. As he calmed down, he, too, flew forward with the 27 souls. He brought the thousands of undying souls behind him, and as if they were carrying out some sort of mission, they floated forward. Time trickled by. Su Ming did not know how much time had passed. At that moment, besides thinking about what his name was, everything else in his mind was blank. Only the sound of the horn served as a guide and a summon, making him slowly walk in the direction from which the sound came. During this process, he devoured 8 undying souls in succession. Similarly, during this process, some of the undying souls also seemed to have gained intelligence, and they started devouring each other. Every single time Su Ming devoured a soul, his body would become more corporeal. When he devoured 8 undying souls, besides his feet, his upper body was no longer in a semi-transparent state, but looked as if it had flesh and blood. His long black hair floated behind his head. His eyes might still be gray, but besides intelligence, there was also a hint of aloofness in them. There were already nearly 50 undying souls like him in this group of thousands, and they continued floating towards the direction from which the sound of the horn came. On this day, in this world where there was no distinction between day and night, Su Ming saw another group of undying souls appearing on the ground before him. When these two groups of undying souls saw each other, the figures that were clearly much stronger than the normal souls let out shrill howls. A war appeared once again. Su Ming looked at the group of undying souls charging madly towards him, and the feeling as if his head was being torn apart gradually grew sharper. He suddenly remembered that he had experienced this before. He remembered that in his previous experience he had died in that war, and his entire being had been devoured until he woke up once again. Killing intent appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He did not want to die. In his heart, he had a vague feeling that every single time he died, he would lose something. He might not know the details, but his instincts were telling him that he could not die. Roars reverberated in the air. The two groups of thousands of undying souls were closing in on each other madly. 5,000 feet, 3,000 feet, 2,000 feet, up to 500 feet, 200 feet. If you like this work, please come to Start Point and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 513. However, at the instant they were only 100 feet away from each other, and they were prepared to start a frenzied battle to devour Su Ming, a battle of life and death. Madness appeared in Su Ming's eyes, and he forgot everything else. The only thing left in his mind was to kill. Suddenly, a black ray of light whizzed over from the gray sky. The ray of light looked to be hundreds of feet long, and there was a person standing at the top of the ray of light. That person wore a white robe and had an apathetic expression on his face. His white hair danced in the air, and his eyes were gray, causing all those who saw him to feel apprehensive. The ripples of power spreading out from his body caused the thousands of undying souls on the ground to immediately start trembling the moment he appeared. At that moment, no one dared to move even a single inch away from each other. The white-haired old man walked through the sky, and the instant he arrived above the thousands of undying souls, he did not even spare a glance at the area below him. He only lifted his right hand, pressed down on the ground, and seized the air. With that one push, Su Ming could clearly see that the old man in white had fused together with the heavens. At that moment, with that one push, the sky came crashing down with loud booming sounds. That feeling immediately caused his body to start crumbling, and all the undying souls around him also started crumbling. It was especially so for the undying souls that had yet to gain intelligence and were just followers in a daze. All of their bodies crumbled at that instant and turned into the endless fog that had appeared on the ground when they were born. Even the undying souls that had become much stronger after devouring a large number of their companions like Su Ming were also trembling. They could not last for more than a breath before their bodies exploded with a bang. That included Su Ming. Su Ming could only watch as his body crumbled, and turned into fog. Then the old man in white in the sky seized the air through the air with his right hand. With that one grab, all the undying souls on the ground crumbled with a bang and turned into a large layer of white fog that charged into the sky. It was sucked into the old man's palm, and once it turned into a ball of fog the size of a fist, it disappeared into his body once he closed his palm around it. The entire process lasted for less than 3 breaths. The old man did not slow down in the slightest. He had already left into the distance and could no longer be seen. The land was empty. All the undying souls had disappeared, including Su Ming. Time passed again. A few months later, wisps of white mist slowly appeared on the ground. The mist gathered together and gradually turned into blurry figures. Although these figures were still blurry, one could faintly see that they were the undying souls that had died here that day. Undying souls didn't mean that they wouldn't die. Rather, they could be revived after dying, and the cycle would continue endlessly. There was an indistinct figure among them, and he appeared at the spot where Su Ming had collapsed that day. That figure was slightly different from the other undying souls. His hands were moving. He continued pressing down, seizing, and performing these strange actions again and again. As their bodies were slowly gathered together by the fog, and their faces were revealed, the person who continued doing these actions was Su Ming. However, at that moment, the gray in his eyes completely occupied his vision. His mind did not show any signs of waking up. He stared at his right hand with a dumbfounded expression as he continued pressing down and seizing. He did not know what his name was, did not know who he was, did not know why he was here. In fact, these questions did not even exist in his mind. He did not think about them. In his eyes, nothing in this world was important. The only important thing was his right hand, which was focused on that action, pressing down and seizing. He did not know why he had to maintain this action either. It was as if everything was an instinct. As he continued pressing down and seizing, the bodies of the other undying souls around him gradually gathered together by the fog. Gradually, they were no longer blurry, and gradually, they lifted their heads and looked at the vast sky. Only Su Ming had his head lowered and was still looking at his right hand. He stared at it blankly and continued with the act of pressing down and seizing, which he had done countless times before. Several days later, the sound of a horn came from the sky. Following the appearance of this sound, the bodies of the other undying souls all trembled. They withdrew their gazes from the sky and looked in the direction of the sound of the horn. They slowly moved their bodies and walked forward. Su Ming still did not lift his head. Even if he heard the sound of the horn and moved with the other undying souls, he still had his head lowered and looked at his right hand, continuing with that eternal act of pressing down and seizing. It was as if everything in the world outside could not pique his interest when compared to the cycle. Su Ming pressed down and seized the air. As he moved forward, he continued doing the same thing. His existence was incredibly different from the other undying souls around him. Slowly, as the thousands of undying souls moved forward, some of them had their wills awakened. They let out shrill howls, and once the brutality in their eyes reached a certain degree, they started devouring their companions in a frenzy, just like they had done before they died. However, compared to the last time, some of the undying souls that woke up this time were the same, but there were also some that were different as the undying souls around him devoured their companions. Su Ming stood there with his head lowered and continued with that action. There were no other awakened, undying souls around him, so he was temporarily safe. The undying souls that were devouring their companions did not notice Su Ming at all. As he pressed down and seized an unknown number of times, a faint layer of ripples gradually appeared before him. Those ripples were very faint, but they truly existed. Su Ming did not look at those ripples. He kept looking at his right hand and continued with that action of pressing down and seizing. A long time passed. Some of the undying souls in the area had died, and the roars of new lives filled the air. This time, 32 powerful undying souls appeared. As their roars echoed in the air, the other undying souls in the area began to tremble, and expressions of terror appeared on their faces. Only Su Ming still had his head lowered and continued with his actions. There was not a single hint of stopping or change in his actions. More and more faint ripples appeared before him. No one paid any attention to Su Ming, including the powerful, undying souls. Once they roared, they brought with them thousands of souls and swiftly floated towards the direction where the sound of the horn came from. During this process, a few more undying souls woke up. Usually, once intelligence appeared in their eyes, they would immediately choose to devour their companions to make themselves stronger. There was one time when an undying soul beside Su Ming woke up. With a low growl, he charged towards Su Ming in an instant, but Su Ming did not lift his head. He did not even cast a glance at him. He only continued with that action of pressing down and seizing the air. Yet the instant he closed in, Su Ming pressed down, and the pouncing, undying soul shuddered. Terror appeared in what little intelligence remained in his eyes, and before his body could even get close to Su Ming, it immediately started shattering. As it did so, Su Ming's right hand turned into a seizing motion. With it, white fog immediately seeped out of the shattered parts of the undying soul's body. That white fog charged towards Su Ming's right hand and turned into a faint picture of fog that disappeared into his palm. The undying soul immediately retreated. In the midst of its fear, its body had become much weaker. As it retreated, another awakened undying soul pounced on it, and as it let out shrill screams, it was devoured. Su Ming did not lift his head, and neither did he stop moving. However, the number of ripples before him increased. Gradually, the area around him started distorting, and it was incredibly eye-catching. The distorted ripples caused the undying souls around him to instinctively retreat, not daring to get closer. As for the undying souls who had become stronger after devouring their companions, they also looked towards Su Ming with confusion and wariness in their eyes. They could feel a power that terrified them surrounding Su Ming, causing them to not dare to get close to him. Slowly, the group of undying souls began to move once more. But in this undying and imperishable world, other than the endless cycle of death and resurrection of those souls, it seemed as if everything else had become a whirlpool that continued to play out. After these thousands of undying souls moved for several months, on this day, on the white land in front of them, a group of about the same number of undying souls, led by nearly 100 powerful undying souls, appeared. Just like the previous few times, the instant the two swarms of undying souls saw each other, they let out shrill roars at the same time and rushed towards each other madly. Su Ming still did not lift his head. He continued pressing down and seizing at the same time. When the two swarms of undying souls came into contact with each other, they let out shrill roars and started devouring each other madly. Both sides started a struggle between life and death. Two undying souls instantly pounced on Su Ming, but the instant they arrived, their bodies crumbled and turned into white smoke that was sucked into Su Ming's palm. Su Ming's movements became faster, and the number of ripples before him increased. The distortions became more obvious, and after a moment, all the undying souls who got close to him let out shrill screams of pain before their bodies crumbled, and they turned into white smoke that was sucked into Su Ming's palm. Su Ming stood there and continued doing this. Gradually, as his movements became faster and the ripples continued growing larger, all the undying souls around him noticed the terror coming from Su Ming. At the instant they stopped devouring and all their gazes gathered on him, Su Ming's right hand, which had not stopped for an unknown number of days, came to an abrupt halt. Once it stopped, Su Ming slowly pushed his right hand downwards. Immediately, booming sounds reverberated in the air, and with Su Ming as the center, a powerful wave of impact swept through the area. The instant the thousands of souls in the area were touched by that wave of impact, all of them crumbled. Once Su Ming pressed down, he seized at the air slowly. A large amount of white fog that looked like a lake of fog surrounded him and charged towards his right hand. The place was silent. Su Ming stood in the middle of the large amount of fog. As the fog was absorbed into his right hand, he lifted his head slowly. The gray hue in his eyes was rapidly fading away, and his intelligence increased by a large margin. I am Su Ming. Please recommend me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 514. Su Ming mumbled and lowered his head to look at his right hand. His body had completely gained corporeal form at that moment, and he looked no different from a physical body. A long black robe appeared around his body, and his long black hair danced in the wind. It formed a contrast with the white fog around him, causing his figure to be faintly discernible within the white fog. The white fog was swiftly seeping into Su Ming's body, and he was continuously absorbing it. Su Ming did not bother himself with the white fog. The intelligence in his eyes grew, and gradually they began to shine brightly. He looked at his right hand as if he was deep in thought. After a long while, when the final wisp of white fog seeped into his body and disappeared, Su Ming stood alone on the empty ground. His gaze was still on his right hand. Time trickled by. Several days later, Su Ming slowly lifted his unmoving right hand. Once he pushed it down on the ground, he seized the air through the air. What is this divine ability? It's just a simple push and seize the air, so why does it possess such great power? This push can destroy all manner of things, and this seize can absorb all the essence in the things that crumble. Su Ming closed his eyes. After a moment, when he opened them again, he looked at the sky. As he absorbed the white fog, his memories slowly returned. Besides remembering his own name, he also remembered how he had died twice in this strange world. The first time, he had died after being devoured by someone. The second time, he had died when the old man in white pressed down and seized the air in the sky. However, that was all he could remember. As for how he had appeared in this strange world, he was still a little confused. Could it be that there's some sort of power contained within this push and seize the air that I don't understand? In silence, Su Ming sat down cross-legged on the white ground and looked at his right hand. In the midst of his contemplation, he continued immersing himself in that push and seize the air. As time passed, wisps of white fog gradually seeped out of the ground around Su Ming. The souls who had died in the past were about to be resurrected, but the moment they appeared, they immediately charged towards Su Ming. It was as if the spot where Su Ming was had turned into a huge vortex that could absorb everything. As the white mist surrounded him, it disappeared into Su Ming's right hand in the blink of an eye and was absorbed into his body. Su Ming's mind became clearer, and an incredibly comfortable feeling made him close his eyes. This feeling was the feeling of one's body rapidly becoming stronger, the feeling of one's soul strengthening, and the feeling of metamorphosis. After trying it once, it would be very difficult for one to not try it again. After some time, Su Ming opened his eyes, and they shone brilliantly. If I devour the other souls here, I can slowly remember more of my memories. It can make me feel stronger, and it can make me no longer have to endure the pain of death in this place. Su Ming mumbled. He stood up and looked at the gray sky. He took a deep breath, lifted his foot, and charged forward. A freezing glare shone in his eyes. His body was like a wisp of black smoke as he charged forward on the white ground. He did not know how much time had passed. He only knew that there was a desire in his heart, a desire to devour more undying souls. On this day, he saw a swarm of thousands of undying souls before him. At the same time he saw them, the undying souls also saw Su Ming. As shrill roars reverberated in the air, the swarm of undying souls roared and charged towards Su Ming under the lead of the dozens of souls who were clearly much stronger than before. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes as he stood there. The instant the undying souls closed in on him, he lifted his right hand and pushed forward. With that one push, a layer of ripples manifested before Su Ming and spread out like a wave. Booming sounds rang out one after another, and the undying souls right at the front started trembling viciously. Some of them even crumbled. Su Ming immediately seized the air with his right hand, and the crumbling, undying souls immediately turned into waves of white fog that charged towards him. The moment the white fog fused into him, Su Ming lifted his head and let out a satisfied roar. He charged forward and started fighting against the undying souls that had not crumbled. Su Ming did not know any other methods. He only knew how to press down and seize the air. However, after trying this simple move countless times, he found that it contained a power he did not understand. The instant he rushed into the swarm of undying souls, booming sounds rang out continuously. After the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, Su Ming stood there alone with his head lowered. A thick layer of white fog surrounded his body, and besides that, there were no other undying souls around him. After a long while, Su Ming lifted his head. His eyes were no longer gray, but were sparkling brightly. He licked his lips, and with one move, he flew up from the ground and charged into the distance in midair. At the end of the world in the distance, the moaning sound of a horn reverberated in the air, and it served as a guide for all the undying souls who heard it to be summoned towards its location. The sound of the horn also served as a summon to Su Ming. As he absorbed more undying souls, the sound of the horn became clearer and stronger. It was filled with temptation, as if his mission was to make himself continuously become stronger so that he could head towards the place where the horn was. As he continued flying forward, he saw several waves of undying souls on the ground, and whenever he ran into them, he would press down on the ground in midair. As he continued going through his experiences, and as he continued absorbing and becoming stronger, the number of times he could make a part of the undying souls crumble gradually increased until half of the undying souls crumbled. Su Ming did not keep track of how much time passed. He only felt that a long time had passed. He had flown far, far away, and the swarm of undying souls that appeared on the ground would usually crumble in large areas when he pressed down on them. His body was like flesh and blood. His hair danced in the air, his black robes danced as he flew, and his right hand had already pressed down and seized the air multiple times. It could even be said to be an infinite number of times. He could feel his own strength clearly. That strength was something that made all the undying souls on the ground tremble when they saw him without even needing to shout as he flew through the sky. However, as time passed, Su Ming's eyes gradually lost their sparkle. Fatigue slowly appeared, and a hint of numbness slowly appeared in his eyes. His current appearance was somewhat similar to that of the old man he had seen before. The sound of the horn continued ringing, but it seemed as if it would never reach the place it came from. One day, as Su Ming was flying, he suddenly came to a halt and turned his head around to look at the world to his right. Over there, he saw a long red arc charging forth at an incredible speed. The instant Su Ming looked towards that long arc, it stopped several thousands of feet away from him and turned into a red-haired man. Half of his body was covered in armor, and his red hair danced in the air. His upper body was bare as he looked towards Su Ming. His eyes were similar to Su Ming's. There was apathy in their dullness. Su Ming looked at him, and he looked back at Su Ming. The two of them stared at each other in midair for a moment before the man suddenly let out a roar. He took a huge step forward and charged towards Su Ming. When he closed in, he lifted his right hand and swung it towards the sky. Immediately, a long spear manifested out of nowhere in his right hand, and he held it in his hand. Once he held the long spear, Su Ming threw it out as he moved forward. The long spear stirred up a piercing sound as it sliced through the air and charged towards Su Ming at an incredible speed. It was so fast that in the eyes of others, it looked like a bolt of lightning that pierced through Su Ming's chest in an instant. However, in Su Ming's eyes, at the instant the long spear was thrown out, everything in the world slowed down. Not only did the long spear slow down, even his body slowed down. Everything slowed down. He saw the long spear flying out bit by bit and closing in on him bit by bit. His right hand was also slowly lifted, and when the long spear finally arrived in front of him, the tip of the long spear stabbed into his chest at a slow speed. An intense pain that made him feel as if he was being torn apart spread through Su Ming's chest at a much slower speed. In his eyes, the tip of the long spear pierced through his body. Once the intense pain spread out, it slowly shot out of his body and fell on the ground behind him. Only at that moment did the world before his eyes return to normal. But the instant it did so, a small part of Su Ming's body crumbled. As it crumbled, Su Ming lifted his right hand swiftly and pushed towards the man. With it, the man shuddered, and his armor exploded to reveal his body. At the same time, his body started trembling violently, and cracks appeared on it. As Su Ming seized the air with his right hand, a large amount of white fog that was so thick that it could not be described with words charged towards him. The man roared madly, clenched his right hand into a fist, and hurled a punch towards Su Ming. His speed was incredibly slow, but in Su Ming's eyes, the man's speed had already reached an extreme. This was a difficult battle. Booming sounds reverberated in the world, and several hours later, they gradually faded away. White fog that surged into the sky filled the land, and it was so thick that it could almost compare to the amount of white fog Su Ming had absorbed on his way here, added together. The thick fog was rapidly diminishing as it was continuously absorbed by the person within. An hour later, as the fog thinned out, a person gradually appeared within. Long black hair, long black robes, a dazed face, apathetic eyes. Su Ming walked out slowly and lowered his head to look at his right hand. The apathetic look in his eyes was the same as that of the old man he had met before. Undying soul. I am the undying warrior soul. Su Ming mumbled. His memories had not recovered. It was as if no matter how much he absorbed, he could only learn his own name. The only thing that increased was his strength, a strength that made him feel as if he had the world in his hands. He had fallen into depravity. Vaguely, there seemed to be a low voice echoing in the gray world. That voice was incredibly distant, as if it contained the passage of time. But if anyone listened carefully, they would only hear the moaning sound of a horn. They would not be able to hear the voice formed by the horn. If you fall into depravity, then I will devour you and be resurrected successfully. If you wake up, then I will willingly be devoured by my own kind and bless it with new life. If you like this work, then you're welcome to vote for me and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 5:15. With an apathetic look in his eyes, Su Ming flew slowly in the sky. He did not look at the ground. Usually, wherever he went, all the undying souls that appeared on the ground would tremble, and with a casual push or seize of his hand, they would immediately shatter and turn into an endless amount of fog that chased after him as he left into the distance. At that moment, he was no different from the old man in white in the past. This process lasted for a very, very long time. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, 30 years, 50 years, 100 years, perhaps even longer. Su Ming did not die again. He had only died twice. Once he died and was resurrected the second time. He continued walking, following the moaning sound of the horn and devouring the endless amount of white fog in the vast world. His strength made him even more numb. The dazed look on his face had already disappeared, and the fatigue was no longer there. There was only calmness left, but this calmness was not the calmness of his heart, but a physical manifestation of his numbness. He did not know just how many undying souls he had absorbed. During the endless amount of time, he did not stop for even a single moment. He continued moving forward and devouring, and Su Ming had devoured more than 9 existences like the red-haired man. Every single time he devoured an undying soul like this, Su Ming would become stronger. The act of pressing down and seizing the air seemed to have become second nature to him. One day, Su Ming saw a mountain before him. It was a gigantic mountain that towered into the clouds. There was a gigantic statue of a dragon snake coiled around the mountain. The dragon snake's head was lowered from the highest point in the sky, as if it was looking down at the ground. The moaning sound of the horn traveled out languidly from the mountain and the statue, spreading through the area. The instant Su Ming saw the statue and the mountain, he felt a strong wave of calling out to him in his numb heart. Undying warrior's soul, return. An old voice echoed in Su Ming's heart at that moment. There was an ancient air to that voice, and when it fell into Su Ming's heart, he shuddered. With an apathetic look in his eyes, he slowly walked forward. When he arrived at the foot of the mountain, he leaped up and landed on the gigantic dragon snake's body. In his heart, there was a kind of guidance that was calling him to choose one of the scales on the snake dragon's body. He would sit there cross-legged and wait for the undying battle soul to return. Su Ming walked on the dragon snake's gigantic scales. As he moved forward, he saw that the scales on the dragon snake's body were packed densely together. There were hundreds of thousands of them. Su Ming sat down cross-legged on one of the scales and looked ahead with a stupefied expression on his face. It was as if this was where he belonged, as if this was the end of his journey. The moaning sound of the horn in the sky became clearer and clearer. This sound gradually made him feel drowsy. He slowly closed his eyes, and an indescribable sense of exhaustion gradually drowned him like a tide. Yet right at the moment he was about to close his eyes completely, Su Ming lowered his head. From the corner of his eye, he saw a line of words that had been scribbled by someone not too far away. It was clear that someone had used a finger to carve a line of words. I am Su Ming. These were the 4 words that were carved on the scale. The instant Su Ming saw those 4 words, his numb gaze froze for a moment, then shrank swiftly. He was clearly stunned for a moment. Those 4 words seemed to have multiplied in size and were flashing his head with loud, rumbling sounds. In the blink of an eye, he rose to his feet and stared at the words. He was panting, and waves of shock battered his heart. As soon as he looked at the words, he felt a sense of familiarity. It was almost as if he were the one who had carved them. Just as Su Ming's heart trembled, the old voice that had been echoing in the air previously suddenly reverberated in the world once again. Undying battle soul, return. The instant the voice reverberated in the air, a strong suction force immediately came from the scale under Su Ming's feet. That suction force made it impossible for Su Ming to fight against it. It was as if the source of his great power came from the statue. It could give him power, but it could also take it back at any time. As that suction force erupted forth, Su Ming's body instantly became indistinct. A large amount of white fog spread out madly from his body and was rapidly absorbed by the scale under his feet. A feeling of weakness filled Su Ming's entire heart and soul. His vision became blurry, but the instant all of this became indistinct and weak, a bang rang out in Su Ming's head. It was as if a bolt of lightning had flashed in his head, causing him to remember something at that instant. He remembered what this place was. He remembered why he came here. He remembered his own identity. He remembered the small snake, remembered the candle dragon, remembered everything. He also remembered the candle dragon's curse and the words it had said. If you fall into depravity, then I will devour you and be resurrected successfully. If you wake up, then I will willingly be devoured by my own kind and bless it with new life. I won't fall into depravity. I won't. I'm not the undying warrior soul. I am Su Ming. Su Ming lifted his head and roared. His feet had already disappeared, and most of his body was rapidly turning invisible. Right at the instant he was about to be completely absorbed and devoured by the dragon snake scale, he swiftly lowered his head and used what remained of his right index finger to use all the remaining strength in his body to point at the scale and write down a row of words. This is the candle dragon's undying and imperishable. This row of words was hastily scribbled behind the words, I am Su Ming. The instant his body disappeared, Su Ming hastily scribbled them down. At the instant he finished writing those words, he had only written half of the word realm, when his right hand turned into fog with a bang. Everything about his body turned into white fog and was absorbed completely by the scale. Su Ming died. He disappeared. Once he died, the mountain regained its calm. The statue of the dragon snake was still coiled around the mountain, unmoving like a dead object. However, if anyone walked on the hundreds of thousands of scales on its body and took a closer look, then they would see the same words written on more than 100,000 scales. I am Su Ming, I am Su Ming, I am Su Ming. This is the candle dragon, undying and imperishable world. I am Su Ming. I want to wake up. I can't fall into depravity. I am Su Ming. The small snake is in danger. Only by waking up can I save it. I am Su Ming. I came from the land of berserkers. I am Su Ming. Sky and earth, ice and fire. I am Su Ming. Don't devour the undying souls. Please don't devour them. Even if you devour one, you won't be able to. These words existed on more than 100,000 scales. Most of them only had the words, I am Su Ming written on them. Only a few scales had 2 lines of words on them. If anyone took a closer look, they would find that the 2 lines of words were clearly carved at different times. All of these were carved by Su Ming. He did not just die twice. This was just something that existed in his memories. In truth, he had come to this mountain and this statue countless times. Every single time he came here, right at the final moment when his body turned into white fog and was absorbed by the scales, he would remember everything. He had no way of fighting back. He could only use this clumsy method to tell his next self what this place was, what his mission was, what he wanted to do, and that he could not fall into depravity. This was a very, very clumsy method, and also a sad and pitiful method. Yet at the same time, Su Ming's tenacity and determination could be seen from the words written on the scales that numbered to more than 100,000. He could also see his persistence and madness. This was the candle dragon's undying and imperishable world. There was no strong sunlight on the vast land. The light in the area was eternal. It was neither bright nor dark. Wisps of white fog floated out from the white ground and gradually turned into faint, illusory figures. One of those figures opened his eyes, and there was a gray, vacant look in his eyes. He was assuming time passed by. He moved forward with the swarm of undying souls by his side, following the sound of the horn. Gradually, after dying several times, he finally became the strongest among the swarm of undying souls. Step by step, as he continued devouring, he gradually became stronger, gradually becoming a powerful berserker. He possessed great power and mastered the ability to press down and seize the air, to move as fast as possible, to slow down as possible, to remain still as possible, to move as possible. With these abilities, he walked through the world and enjoyed the comfort and strength he gained after devouring undying souls. He also went through the time when his eyes were filled with a gray hue, and when the gray hue disappeared and became bright, he remembered his own name. But in the end, he still became numb and calm, and he once again came to the place where the horn called out to him. When he came to one of the scales on the dragon snake statue's body, the statue remembered everything the instant its body disappeared, and on the scale before him, he left behind a sentence that he wanted to tell his next self that he would never give up and would never despair. Perhaps he would not be able to see these words the next time, because there were simply too many scales in this place, but this was hope. This was the last hope he could think of. He did not want to sink into oblivion. He wanted to fight back. Time passed. As Su Ming died and was reborn again and again, he came to the statue of the dragon snake time and time again. And as his words flowed down his throat, most of the hundreds of thousands of scales on the dragon snake body had been carved into them by him time and time again. More than half of them had 2 lines carved on them. Some had 3 lines carved on them. Some had 4 lines carved on them. And there were no more than 30 scales that had 5 lines carved on them. I am Su Ming. This is the dead candle dragon's undying and imperishable world. The small snake is in danger. Only when I am truly awake can I save it, understand the sky and earth, ice and fire, and find the pros and cons that belong to me. This is the only way to leave this place. Don't devour undying souls. Don't devour even a single one of them. Please, please, don't devour. Those who openly offend the mighty Han must be killed, no matter how far away they are. I've stopped using Japanese goods since a long time ago, and I won't use them in the future either. I'm not asking for votes today, I just want one thing. Diaoyu Islands belong to China. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 516. Another unknown year arrived. Dressed in white robes, Su Ming walked towards the place where the sound of the horn had come from with a calm expression. He arrived on the dragon snake back and stood on one of the scales. At the instant he lowered his head and his body returned to its original position. The apathetic expression on his face turned into one of disbelief countless times. With fatigue all over his body and an apathetic expression, Su Ming stood on the dragon snake's scale. At the instant he sat down, he saw the words on the scale, and a violent shock appeared on his face. He lifted his trembling right hand, and before his body disappeared, he carved down a row of words again and again and again. The cycle repeated endlessly. Every single time he woke up, the end of the path he took would always lead to death. He would either die among the other undying souls or die on the dragon snake statue. The only thing he gained was that the number of words on the dragon snake scale kept increasing. Each line of words represented a death, and when all the scales were carved down, all the scales had more than the 5 elements of himself on them. Every single time he woke up after he died, his memories would be muddled. Not a single one of them would be left behind. It was as if his memories had been completely wiped off, and the cycle would continue. If it were not for those lines of words, perhaps Su Ming would have truly fallen into oblivion. He would remain in the undying and imperishable world for all eternity, unable to wake up. He would be immersed in the endless cycle of life and death. From struggling and roaring, his heart would become numb. This was a cage. Time and time again, the bird would think that it had flown out, but at the instant it died, it would suddenly understand that it was still in the cage. Only every single time he disappeared from the dragon snake's body would Su Ming remember everything. It was as if it was an illusory dream. Only when he woke up from the dream would he be absent-minded. But at the moment he was absent-minded, the dream was no longer there with those lines of words. Su Ming forced himself not to forget as he died time and time again. He forced his will to not disappear. He forced himself to persevere, even if the direction of his perseverance was unclear, even if there might not be an answer to everything. After an unknown number of times, there was one time when Su Ming arrived on the dragon snake scale. He was on the spot where the 5 lines of words were carved. As Su Ming looked at the words written on it, he looked at the words left behind in one of the cycles of life and death from an unknown number of years ago. His heart trembled. At the instant his body disappeared, he lifted his head and let out a roar filled with unwillingness to admit defeat. As he roared, he pressed his right hand against the scale on the ground before it disappeared. This time, he did not leave behind any words. Instead, he drew a runic symbol on the scale. This was the blueprint of a formation that he had found in Hong Luo's inherited mystical ability after he had recovered all of his memories. The function of this formation was to create vibrations and amplify a certain sound infinitely, forming an echo that reverberated in the world. Based on Hong Luo's legacy in Su Ming's memories, if this rune was activated in an empty space, then the echo would last for a month. During that month, even if the person was very far away, they would still be able to hear it vaguely. However, this rune was rather big. Su Ming had only completed 1/100th of a rune. It was far from completing the entire structure of the rune. However, this time, Su Ming had only managed to carve 1/100th of the rune, but he still had the next time. As time passed by, and Su Ming returned to this place again and again, every single time he woke up before he died, he would remember everything and complete the structure of the rune. There were some mistakes, and there were some parts where the scale where he sat did not conform to the structure of the rune. However, in the undying and imperishable world, during the countless cycles of life and death and repetition, There was finally one time when Su Ming came to the dragon snake's body. At the instant he woke up before he died, he carved the final stroke of the rune. Once the rune was completely completed, the instant Su Ming's body disappeared, he activated the rune, and with the loudest voice he had ever used in his life, he let out a roar. Don't devour any of the undying souls. Don't devour a single one of them. At the same time, Su Ming's voice traveled outwards, and his body disappeared. The rune he had finally created after countless attempts on the dragon snake's body started operating with a bang, amplifying Su Ming's voice endlessly and sending it out with loud, booming sounds in all directions. His voice was like a wave that reverberated endlessly in the world. 10 days after Su Ming's death, the fog that had appeared on a white piece of land in the vast world once again gathered together to form Su Ming's body. His body gradually turned from an illusion to corporeal form. His gray eyes looked at his surroundings in a daze. His memories were blank. As he looked at the gray sky, there was not a single thought in his head. It was just like the first time he looked at the sky. He just stood there and stared at it blankly. Some fog slowly appeared around him and gathered together to form the figures of some undying souls. Su Ming, who stood among the many undying souls, looked incredibly normal. There was not a single hint of anything different about him. Once the newly formed undying souls gathered together, they lifted their heads slowly and looked towards the gray sky, as if they were waiting for something. When a moaning sound of a horn came from the sky and entered Su Ming's mind, his body trembled. He slowly lowered his head, and just like the undying souls beside him, he floated towards the place where the sound of the horn came from. Su Ming did not know that he had already repeated this action countless times. Yet this time, after Su Ming floated among the undying souls for less than a day, besides the moaning sound of the horn, there was also a furious roar that reverberated violently in the vast world. Don't devour any of the undying souls. Don't devour a single one of them. That voice reverberated in the air and fell into Su Ming's ears, as well as the undying soul's ears. Su Ming stopped moving forward for a moment and lifted his head slightly to cast a glance at the sky. After a moment of hesitation, he and the other undying souls continued floating forward as if they had not heard anything. Time passed by, and once again, some of the undying souls let out low roars and pounced on their companions beside them, starting the process of devouring them repeatedly. This time, that included Su Ming. Madness appeared in his gray eyes, and he turned around swiftly to pounce on a bewildered, undying soul beside him. The instant he was about to devour it, to make himself stronger based on his instincts, that enraged roar that was filled with an unwillingness to admit defeat traveled forth once again from the vast sky. Don't devour any of the undying souls. Don't devour a single one of them. That voice had appeared multiple times during the past few days, and it had gradually become much weaker. As it echoed in the air, it fell into Su Ming's mind, causing him to freeze once again as he prepared to devour the undying souls. There was a struggle in his gray eyes. His mind was originally empty, but now the low roar reverberated in his mind. He slowly loosened his grip on the undying soul. He did not know why, but the voice that came from the sky was incredibly familiar. As he let go of the undying soul, the other powerful souls around him completed their devouring. Once they became slightly stronger, they lifted their heads and roared toward the sky. Those roars fell into Su Ming's ears, causing him to struggle once again. This time, he struggled for a very long time, and when he finally finished struggling, he looked around himself and found that there were no longer any undying souls around him. The undying souls that had been born together with him had already left in groups. Only Su Ming remained in the place alone as he struggled. The other undying souls did not care about whether Su Ming stayed or not. They only followed the call of the horn and continued moving towards that place. Su Ming stood alone on the vast land with a dazed look on his face. After a long while, he lowered his head and floated forward slowly. Probability was a term that conveyed a form of chance. It was a change in the calm. Its appearance was usually not something that could be controlled. It was just like probability. There would always be a possibility that a different fluctuation would appear when the same fluctuation appeared countless times. It was the same in the undying and imperishable world. Su Ming did not know how many times he had reincarnated. In fact, this question did not even exist in his mind. Even if this was the hundreds of thousands of times he had woken up, in his eyes, this was the first time he had woken up. He did not notice the difference in his awakening this time. Only those who had seen him die and wake up several hundreds of thousands of times will be able to tell that this time was different. This time, due to the existence of a voice, Su Ming did not devour the other undying souls. He continued moving forward in a daze until the voice no longer existed. Even when half a month went by, he was still drifting forward. On the way, he did not run into any other undying souls. This was the first time he had woken up over the countless years. As he drifted forward in a daze for half a month, the gray hue in Su Ming's eyes grew stronger. A feeling of hunger and weakness also rose from the depths of his heart. Occasionally, he would look around himself in search of a source that could stop him from feeling weak and hungry. He had seen it before, but every single time he saw it, the voice in his head that had already disappeared would echo faintly in his head, causing Su Ming's struggles to become even more intense. He longed to devour, but the familiar voice did not let him. In fact, as time passed by, he gradually had a vague feeling that he could not devour other undying souls. When his struggles reached their peak, and he saw a dozen something undying souls drifting about in a daze on the white land, Su Ming could no longer suppress the desire to devour them, and he charged forward. These dozen something undying souls had clearly just been born and did not possess any form of intelligence. Once Su Ming closed in on one of them and was about to devour it, a strong struggle appeared on Su Ming's face. As he let out a low growl, his eyes were no longer gray, but purplish red. He struggled and gave up on devouring it. Instead, he lifted his right hand and punched the undying soul's head, shattering its body. The instant the undying soul died, a bang suddenly rang out in Su Ming's head, and a pain as if he was being torn apart spread through his body. In the midst of that pain, clarity appeared in Su Ming's eyes. I am Su Ming. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.